Coming up next, The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy. Every Thursday from 4 p.m, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
People are struggling to have conversations and connect with others that they don't completely agree with on every topic. And I think that's probably the biggest problem that we need to try and solve, is how after all this division and after all this separation do we end up bringing people together again, and what does unity really look like?
New Zealand faces some pretty big issues. First one is COVID and the aftermath. There's no getting away from that. Second is racial division. It's been ginned up and it's dangerous. Another issue that maybe people haven't got their head around yet is digital currency. What form does that take? Is it programmable? Will it be used to manipulate behaviour and patterns of behaviour? Those questions need to be asked and answered.
How can you have fair, open, democratic government by people who are appointed? It's a ridiculous idea. And if that idea is taken to its zenith, then this country is in real trouble, because democracy, one person, one vote, where every vote is of equal value, has got to be the foundation of a modern New Zealand.
What's true, what's not true, how our kids are to be educated. And, I have a great fear for the future. I think we know from history where this could end up.
This is The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy, right here on RCR.
Welcome to The Crunch on Reality Check Radio. I'm your host, Cam Slater, and this is the place where we crunch the political issues and cut through the politician's spin. It's crunch time. The election is all over bar the shouting, and voting finishes at 7 p.m. on Saturday. We have another interesting show ahead for you this week. My first guest this afternoon is Kane Warren, the Vision New Zealand candidate from Manurewa. And he's been handing in firearms to police that have been handed in to him as a result of the Man Up program. We'll talk in some detail about that program and how his interactions with police have gone as he hands in those firearms. Then I'll be talking with David Farrer, probably New Zealand's best pollster, about his thoughts of the campaign this year, and he'll also give us some predictions about where this is all going to land. War has broken out in Israel, who have suffered the largest scale attack on their country for a considerable time, and it just serves to show us all how lucky we are to live in New Zealand. And finally, I'll have a chat with my buddies to find out what they think about the various election campaigns from the parties, who stood out, who was a bit meh, and who was terrible. But it's now clear that we will have a change of government, and the only remaining question is what that new government will look like. If you haven't voted, then get out there and get it done. Make your vote count. Don't forget to send comments to inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
You're listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
Well, it's done. The campaign, that is. All over bar the shouting, recriminations, and the final count. We'll have seen off the worst government in living memory. They locked us down, locked us up, promoted division, racism, and segregation. They sought to subdue us, fair means or foul, and they had the cheek to call it kindness. Well, voters, you're going to repay that kindness by biffing them from Parliament. We're going to run them out on a rail. Let's hope they get the message. Sadly, though, I don't think they will. The country, its economy, and its people are in a perilous state. And that's the real damage this crowd have wrought on New Zealand. And it's going to take generations to repair. The world is no better. We have wars in Ukraine and Israel. where terrible things are being done in the name of ideology in one form or another. Nations that are invaded by terrorists or foreign interlopers have every right to defend themselves and seek to neutralize their enemies. They deserve to live in peace. We are so very lucky here in New Zealand that despite an awful government, we do actually live in peace and get to vote in free and fair elections. And our elections are free and fair, despite what some may claim. I've been involved in the political process for all of my life. I can safely say that our elections do not have any of the partisan antics that other countries experience. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be careful and keep a watch about what's going on around us. So let's rate the campaigns. The Labour Party told us that they were in it for you, but never told us what they'd actually do. Their campaign was negative because they had nothing positive to tell us. They attacked everyone and made us hate them a little bit more. The Greens boxed on, hating the well-off, promising riches for all via taxation. I mean, how does that even work? And denied the polling evidence all about them that their teams are going to be in opposition, meaning that all their promises are meaningless waffle. It's unlikely that their current leadership will still be there at the next election. Nationals run an ordinary campaign that in the last few weeks has shown us nothing but blind panic. Running scare campaigns about our democratic processes is as dishonest as it is desperate. And the fact that they can't get over 40% in the polls despite a target-rich environment says it all. And remember, these people have told us all that they'd have done nothing different from the Ardern regime other than they'd have been more efficient at trampling our rights than the other lot. And the problem with a strategy that says you'll be less crap than the other lot is still asking voters to vote for crap. The ACT Party can put their diminished result down to the arrogance and hubris of David Seymour and his unbecoming gloating, along with his veiled and not so veiled threats to cause instability. That and their rather stupid attacks against Winston Peters. Which brings me to New Zealand First, who really have had a dream run in the campaign where everyone, including their allies, stupidly attacked them, making them incredibly relevant this election. Everyone said, look at Winston, and we all did, and liked what we saw. Winston Peters hasn't had a grumpy moment, and it'll be his smile that will be the largest on election night. And the very thing that National has spent 24 years fighting against will have happened again. They'll be having to deal with Winston Peters. And that has to be a massive fail on National's part. I'm going to enjoy all those blinkered National Party voters having to now defend a man they've been hating on for decades. But don't get me wrong, I'm proud of this country, and we can do so much better. Let's hope that the politicians we elected to form a new government put their petty differences aside and start to govern New Zealand for the benefit of all Kiwis. We need an end to the division, the racism, the separatism, the polarisation and the disharmony. We need to work together to fix this broken nation. And that's why we voted for MMP, so that parties would work together. And that seems to be something National, Labour and ACT have forgotten along the way. So let's hope they put their differences aside, celebrate the common ground and bring together a unifying government. That's my hope on Saturday night as the results come in. A rejection of the evils as described before, categorically and emphatically rejected. Let's take back our country and get it back on track. And yes, that was deliberate, but it is how I feel, and you'll never die wondering what I think. Exciting news, everyone. Our RCR app is now live and it can be downloaded from the app stores, both iOS and Android. Thank you all for being so patient while I've been working hard behind the scenes to get this app out there. And I love it. Finally means I can divorce myself from the mainstream media in the mighty Isuzu D-Max. The Bluetooth connection works brilliantly. You can check that out at realitycheck.radio/app. That's at realitycheck.radio/app. Kane Warren is a candidate for Vision New Zealand in the Manurewa electorate. He heads up the successful Man Up program and has been taking guns handed in by former gang members going through the Man Up program and giving them to police. He talks with me now about that and about the hope that Man Up brings to men wanting change in their lives. Kane, welcome to The Crunch.
Yeah, morning, Cam. Thank you very much.
Look, I saw the news last week that you've been handing in some guns that you've grabbed off some gang members who've been part of the Man Up campaign, and I was interested to see a video of you trying to hand in a gun to the police at Manukau station there. And let's just talk a bit about how you get these guys to trust you enough to hand over their weapons.
Yeah, thanks, Cam. Kia ora, everybody. My name's Kane, and I'm the National Director for Man Up. So, giving this experience some context, we give men this opportunity in our community to be involved in a men's support group. And it's open to everybody. Doesn't matter your background, your colour or creed. You come as you are, no judgment. And I guess that's the foundation for men to be able to have an opportunity to clear their conscience, work through things as a man, as a father, to improve, just themselves as a person, as contributing back to their families. So we find that I personally have built this trust in the community for some time now, probably over the last 8 years. And yes, gang members do find their way to Man Up. And as the story had exposed, firearms have been handed in. So really what we're saying here is I think we've got this buffer in between the law and the community. It's a safe space and a place, as I said earlier, where men can actually clear their conscience, clean their act up actually at the same time regarding the situation of holding illegal firearms. So the word is probably trust. I built some trust. So these guys, rather than them turn up to the police station and probably get 10 questions and thrown into the interview room, it's probably better they come to me as a mediator, and then I go to the police and, as you've seen, hand in the firearm.
Mm. And, I mean, you say that the Man Up has the, I guess, a motto of come as you are, which that's the same motto that the church I go to in Papatoetoe has, where we welcome everybody. It doesn't matter what you're wearing, what you look like, who you are, where you come from. Come as you are. Does that help with these guys that are coming to exit gangs, that they're accepted as they are?
Yeah, I think the word acceptance has been a battle all their life, right from childhood. I can only imagine a lot of these men that were boys once upon a time growing up in homes, and whatever the condition of their homes was or wasn't, things like affirmation, acceptance have been their battle their entire life. So the last thing they need is to come to any organisation and experience judgment. And I guess that's where the opportunity is. It's got to be genuine because they've picked up fake all their lives. They've seen it. They've heard it. So no doubt about it. If there's a door that's open and they can come in as they are and welcomed, and it's a starting point, I think they're better. They're gonna make better decisions moving forward in terms of what do they want in terms of being a better man, better father, better provider. So yeah, big word there, Cam, around acceptance.
Mm. I mean, I talked with Heka Robertson in Wellington a few months ago about the Man Up program, and when I had the Rebel News guys here from Australia and Canada, they were very impressed by the ethos of Man Up. And Heka was telling us about guys who'd basically walked across the road from the Mongrel Mob pad and dropped their patch at the door and never took it back up again. And it just seems like a really powerful story that these blokes can feel safe in leaving the gang by coming through Man Up.
100%, and I got another good example of that. A gang member in Auckland, I won't mention the gang name, but cut a long story short, coming through Man Up and the support that he received as a gang member, he was able to transition out of the gang, and he was a business owner at the time while he was a gang member, He was going through some court matters regarding stuff that was, I guess, around domestic violence. So he had a whole lot of things going on all at once. So we just, as we do, we take these guys on this journey. This was a one-on-one journey. Sometimes it's not just about a group. It's actually a one-on-one journey most of the time that we followed them through, not just on a 1 week, 1 hour per session, 1 hour session, but actually walking them through some of the difficulties and challenges that they've got to face, whether it be the courts, the justice system. But this example of this guy, he actually made a comment about 6 weeks into the program. He said, "You know what, brother? My profits have gone up in my business since I've been coming to Man Up." And I said, "Well, that's good. Why do you think that is?" And he says, "Well, it's because I'm starting to feel a lot better about myself. And now that I feel better about myself, my kids are not walking on eggshells at home." So, yeah, that's just an example, Cam, of when support's given to these men, they really have got the potential to be better. And I think it's just really comes down to, having somebody there to just guide them through those initial breakthrough moments that they need in their life or their family.
Yeah, I mean, men have a real problem sharing their troubles with even their best mates. They won't talk about things. But Man Up seems to provide them with I hesitate to call it a safe space because it sounds a bit weak, you know. So we hear about all these safe spaces, but it really is a safe space for them to share their burdens that they might be having with their relationship, with their family, with the law, with the justice system, such as it is, which enables them to clear a lot of the rubbish that's been written by their own thoughts in their head, and to get some clarity. And I guess you're also bringing a bit of faith into it as well.
Absolutely. The mantra is, and I guess this is for the traditional Kiwi male, it's not harden up, bro. It's open up, bro. And we walk that journey with them, and that reculturing, I guess, around men opening up and talking. And for me, the experience of walking with men, I know right across the country, our program and the men that do facilitate, we're very honoured to hear some of the stories and tragedies and trauma that men open up about for the first time that they've ever had an opportunity to share these dark secrets of their soul, I guess, where they couldn't talk to their wife, can't have these conversations at work. But we create the space where it's brothers opening up to each other, and it's powerful because, as you mentioned, there is the faith side to it. And those deep confessions coming out of things that have happened to them and things that they've done as well brings the first stages of a release of things that they've been holding on for decades.
And I guess a physical manifestation of holding on to things are these firearms, these illegal firearms that these guys have got.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And let's just say if a gang member is coming into Man Up, we don't tell them at the front door, "Hey, take your patch off," or "Hey, it's time for you to leave the gang." That's something they've got to discover, because they've got inspirational men around them that have made those steps, that have made those changes. It gives them hope. It shows them that they don't have to stay in the position that they're in. So when we talk about better fathers, more responsible, caring partners, that model and those mentors are actually around them. So as much as they've got the gang that may be negative and pulling them in a different direction, they've got another influence in the community, called Man Up. These men that are living examples to them that change is actually possible. So the program's not clinical, It's not like ticking boxes like they would do in a prison context. This is a program that's sort of guided by, some good content, good topics, but it creates conversation. And when these men open up, it's like a release valve. It's like it's been, you undo the button there, and then pop, out comes stuff that's been suppressed since childhood.
Yeah, and I guess people are creatures of habit, and you get stuck in an environment. It might be a marriage, it might be a workplace, it could be a club or something like that, and you think to yourself, things could be a whole lot better, but making that decision, the actual decision to step over a line, which is a very tiny step, really, when you think about it physically or even mentally, but people are held back by the comfort of what they know rather than the discomfort of what is unknown. And so when they finally make that step, do they feel a sense of relief that they've made that step, that there's no going back? Oh, okay, I've done this now. There's no going back into that life. I'm moving forward, and then everything starts to change from there. And then if they look back on it, I mean, imagine you have an outreach program where you go back to people 5 years or 2 years later and say to them, well, what was the hardest thing? And I imagine they probably say the hardest thing was making that decision to step over that line.
It's a good point. Yeah. Stepping over that line, and that's the initial, as we would say, is a breakthrough or a cycle breaker in something like addictions or dysfunctional behavior. But we know, and we encourage them to know that it's not a quick fix. It's you've been in dysfunctions, for example, maybe 20 years, and this ain't going to go away in 5 minutes, but it will get better as you walk it out. And I think that's the key thing with Man Up, is that it's more than just a program. The brothers that engage with the program call it a lifestyle change. And so I think that's probably the key part. And as you say, Cam, 5 years later, there is a testimony to tell. There is a story to tell. And that's why I believe Man Up is successful, because it is the champions telling others of their story and how they got the breakthrough, how they for example, broke dysfunction in their life, how they walked away from the gang culture, how they broke addiction. And so we are big on, at the right time, getting the men to share their story, their journey with other men and the community. So that's not a secret, just confided in Man Up. But when they're ready to tell their story, it's time now to let everybody in on the chapters of your life that were tough, that were challenging. Yes, there were highlights, there were mountaintops, there were breakthroughs, and often sometimes there are relapses, but yet they still come through eventually stronger than they came in at the beginning.
It almost becomes contagious the more people that go through and succeed in essentially welcoming freedom into their life rather than the restrictions of a gang or restrictions of prison or restrictions of all sorts of social constructs that hold people in situations. When they experience that freedom and then things get better for them, and then they start telling some of their other mates who are, let's be frank, they're pretty tough guys, that becomes contagious and encourages other people to cross that line too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I think we, in Man Up, help over time take off the negative stereotype labels, like gang member, like offender, just that language, like criminal, even though they've got criminal records and they make this change and want to get into employment, we help these men, take off those labels that they've been labeled as useless even in their childhood. You're never going to make it. So there's a lot of work to be done spiritually, mentally, for our men to transform into what we believe God's called them to be. And that's great men. So we put on new labels. Hey, you're a beautiful guy. You're an affectionate man. You've a father that loves to give those love languages to your children. And so that's the exciting part for me, Cam, is seen on the other side. Once we get through the tough stuff, peel off some of those layers, you actually start to see this beautiful man, father, brother coming into his family, and the benefits. When I often look back now, 8 years, you see these champion fathers now that were once absent, irresponsible, addicted and broken, are now men that are actually living fulfilling lives and enriching those that are around them, their children, their mokopuna, and their wives and partners.
It's an admirable program, and it staggers me that it doesn't have official acceptance out there. It has unofficial acceptance. There's plenty of people in the community who say this program works, all of those sorts of things. But when it comes to actually having interventions with people that are essentially a captive audience, in corrections, there doesn't seem to be any official acceptance of that program.
Yeah, we're on the positive here of man up and better fathers, and I think politicians are sort of what I'd call man down. They really have got a tall poppy syndrome when it comes to successful programs, and they should acknowledge it, regardless of personality challenges that they may have with the likes of Brian Tamaki. To be honest and fair, the program is bigger than a man. It's spread right across the country. And I think corrections or our government, they've had those issues, but they can't hold up the progress. I think if Man Up is credible, we've got proven results, it should be on the table for discussion and given an opportunity to actually help make an impact, because our prison numbers are not going down. Our offending is not reducing. In fact, it's increasing. So any programs like Man Up, or I know some other community champions out there in Manurewa, South Auckland as well, that don't get no recognition from this government.
It's actually an indictment, and the politicians, I find that the only way that you can get a politician to listen to you is if they're in fear of losing their seat.
Yes, that's true. And again, I get we have to go back to why is a MP or a representative in government on our behalf is to represent the people, and we don't feel that representation given even Man Up an opportunity to have access to help our people, help our men. And I've taken a bold step too, Cam. Under Vision New Zealand, I've launched what we call a policy called the Ministry for Men's Affairs.
Yeah.
And that basically looks into where men are not performing. And there's a lot of areas where men are not performing and it's not given really strong attention. It's an opportunity to actually address that. And so that policy has come through the years of experience of looking into how our men can be better to perform for our families, for our children. We have a massive fatherlessness problem in New Zealand. A third of children growing up in New Zealand grow up in a home with no father. That itself is a massive problem, not only today, but in the future.
Well, it's an intergenerational problem, something that welfarism has exacerbated rather than solved. And the politicians seem to think that the only way you can solve something is to apply money to it rather than going and looking at what works. And you look at the National Party, their policy for boot camps for kids. Well, you wouldn't need boot camps for kids if they had decent fathers that were teaching them how to act and behave. And we had a society where people's individual responsibility kicked in well before their individual consequences kicked in.
Absolutely. I agree with that statement 100%. And if Man Up was given an opportunity to be involved in our reconstruct of our homes through working with our men, I know for a fact we would bring a solution to that problem there of the breakdown of family. Now, but the breakdown of our families is the cornerstone issue around our crime. I think it's just common sense, Cam, but obviously common sense is not that common at all.
It's
when
not
we're
that
talking
common.
about our politicians, it's crazy, man.
But here's the thing, right? We've got these guys in prison for committing. By the time you end up getting sent to prison, you're going to have a fair amount of time of committing crimes before you got sent to prison. You've probably had 20 or 30 convictions of a lesser degree before you end up in prison. It's very hard to actually get sent to prison in New Zealand these days. There's a lot of talk about how easy it is, but it's pretty hard. You've got to commit a lot of crimes or some very serious crimes. But while we've got them sitting in prison, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, life, whatever, it's ironic. They're a captive audience. And I know corrections has programs that are in place, but recidivism is out the window. It's approaching, 80, 90%. So you've got to say that the programs that corrections have invested in, because that's the sort of womble speak that they talk about, right? They've invested in these programs. They're not working. And yet we've got a program that has demonstrable, clear successes. I bet you've got an address book in your phone, hundreds of men that have successfully gone through Man Up whose lives have been changed that could serve as a testimony for these, well, I consider them to be fools at correction. I mean, there's some good, hardworking, caring people that are in corrections, but the reality is they're there to lock people up and let them out when their time's finished and try and keep them safe in between. Wouldn't it be better if they actually, being a captive audience, had Man Up classes, had Man Up situations in the prisons? So you calm down the violence, you change people on the inside so when they get on the outside, they can rehabilitate themselves even further. It seems to be a logical solution, and I'm stunned that nobody's taken it up.
Yes, we look into the ideologies of political parties as the outcome for men and women, because, hey, women, especially Māori women, are highly overrepresented in the statistics of incarceration right now. So that's absent mothers now, not only just absent fathers. So what is the end result for prisoners? Do we want them, being rehabilitated to think about, their own personal responsibility, which I know a lot of the programs in prison look at that. But do they go into even deeper parts of the father, for example, like Man Up, to actually help them understand that, hey, you're on a journey home. Home is where you need to be, not in this prison. And so helps programs and developing them around their future and becoming a responsible father. Because I know a lot of the men that I do mentor in prisons, they're talking what they want to be, back engaged with their kids, because there's a lot of downtime, 2 years, 3 years, and sometimes even longer away from their children. There's a rebuild that needs to actually happen there inside the wire, but also helping them transition out. And I think that's where sometimes the missing link is. They get released from prison, most of them, with a $350 one-off payment called Steps to Freedom. But there's a joke out there that says it's the steps to reoffend. So there's not a reintegration strength that we have with our prison system right now. And I know it for a fact, a lot of the men that go into these housing situations and bail homes, they are still controlled by the gangs. There's drugs, prostitution happening, and you're setting them up to fail, literally.
You can see how it works in society. Kiwis are great knockers. We like to drag people down. A case in point is this Man Up program. The reason why Brian said this to me on an interview a couple of weeks ago, that Andrew Little said, we don't want the Man Up program because it'll send people to Brian Tamaki's church. And it just seems that it's being blocked and knocked on the basis of one personality rather than looking at the actual program and its successes. And we need to have a step change in New Zealand where we don't knock people down, that we build people up. And, I'm guilty of knocking people down all the time, doing what I do. People say to me that was a bit cruel, Cam, or that was a bit mean or whatever. And it's kind of in our society that as soon as the media or politicians have built somebody up, they then set about knocking them down again.
Yeah, again, I say, we're not very good at celebrating success, especially when it doesn't come from maybe a portfolio of a politician. I didn't, maybe as a politician, I didn't create this. I didn't have my hand on in this work. Rather than realizing that actually any community champion that's doing great work should be supported, should be uplifted, in what they do. And so Man Up is a good example of that. The table is open to politicians and to come and talk to us, so that we can actually get the first steps. We've made a lot of first step engagements by emailing the prison management, by emailing politicians and those holding those portfolios, but we just get denied, not even to have that talk across the table. So not only are they knocking us, that the democracy that we should be having should have an open table to actually have a talk, not to be ignored and not to be not engaged with, because I think that's where it's breaking down. And then I don't want our people losing hope either. I don't want our facilitators thinking that their government is not actually backing them up. In fact, it's ignoring them. So it has has an impact on those that are trying to do the work voluntary as well. It doesn't help at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real challenge to try and defeat that. But 27 years ago, we brought in MMP, and MMP was supposed to create coalitions where people work together, where parties cross-pollinate with ideas and things like that. And what we've seen in reality is an increased polarization, where you're on the red team or the blue team, and they're large parties, almost too large, that tend to silence the smaller parties, but not engage with picking up good ideas around the place. And we're seeing this at the moment with the media and the larger parties out there saying to people, look, if you don't vote red or blue, then we could have another election, which is totally against what MMP is all about. It's about sitting down across the table, or even better, not have any tables acting as barriers between people, and sorting out a common position that we can move forward together as a country. But it seems that the major parties and the media don't want that to happen. They like the conflict. They like the constant one team against the other, rather than seeing a cohesive and collaborative government that looks for the best solutions in any particular area and then deploys those. So
yes,
I find it frustrating that good ideas, doesn't matter who comes up with those good ideas, whether it's you or Brian Tamaki or any other politician that's out there in a minor party, it's the good people who are trying to do wonderful things for the country in particular niche areas. Why not adopt those? And it just, and I was locked up in that polarized, environment where people still say to me today, on Twitter or X, as it's called now, I say something about somebody, and then somebody comes back at me with a picture of me standing next to John Key from 10 years ago. It's almost in the same position that the people in your Man Up program are suffering, where their past is holding them back because no one will let them get out of their past because, you're criminals, you've got a conviction. So it's almost like there's no ability in New Zealand society for redemption and changing yourself. And if you do change yourself, then everybody still throws the things at you that you've committed in your past, whether they be crimes or, acts of political freedom to say and do what you want. And I don't know how we can break that in society, where we just got to knock people all the time for what they did in the past and not what they're doing now.
I totally agree. And I mean, isn't it something that the asylum seekers, the government are actually passing some sort of legislation that they're allowing asylum seekers into New Zealand, and they won't check their they don't have to check or worry about their background, whether it be a criminal background, but yet the people of New Zealand, as you made an example, after 10 years of living a clean life and not being involved in any criminal behaviour, they still are marginalised, and they are the citizens of New Zealand. So, it's a lot of conflicts.
Well, let's get back to talking about the guns thing, because that interests me. I'm a collector myself, and I've got a not inconsequential number of firearms. And one of my bugbears that I've had with the police is they don't seem to have a process on how to get illegal guns in off the street. They just have all these laws and processes and regulations that are policing licensed firearms owners, but they're not doing anything about unlicensed or illegal firearms owners. Whereas you're coming up against this on a regular basis, regular enough that it's significant to make the news. And you've tried to hand firearms into the police. And, you sent me through a video before this interview to have a look at. And I was staggered, that there didn't seem to be. I mean, I got the feeling that when you were putting the guns in your boot of your car, that you had trepidation there. You were unsure about what was going to happen when you got to the Manukau police station. And then just to see the stunned and baffled looks, that why would anybody come into the station and say, I've got an illegal firearm I need to hand in, what's the process for that? And they didn't know. They just didn't know.
I think one of the things there, Cam, is that you're right. because it's an illegal firearm. It's a machine gun. You're thinking, I don't have a firearms license. I don't handle firearms, so I'm by no means a specialist. So yeah, heck, you're nervous. You're wondering what's going to happen at the other end when I take the firearm. Are they going to start accusing me because I sort of I've got that look. I'm Maori. All these sorts of things cross your mind. But I think realizing that getting this illegal firearm out of the hands of someone that's wanting amnesty, at the same time handing it into the police, because then that actually gets that firearm off the streets with all the homicides and murders that are going on, and with firearms in Auckland City alone, it's a good deed. I think for me though, it highlights that I represent a lot of good, solid Kiwi men and people, not just men, women, that actually do charitable good deeds, and that's to me was a good deed. May not be received by the police that day like that, but here's the saddest thing. They said, look, we're going to get someone in the senior police to give you a call. Well, it's been 2-3 weeks and nobody's given me a call. So it's like, I'm just hoping that they realize that in our community, yes, there are gangs and there is crime and things are not getting better, but there are people like me, a sample of probably many people out there that have got good engagement, good trust, and can get results through gangs, firearms, and the law.
But you're
creating that mediation space.
Yeah, and you're actually taking possession of somebody's former identity. You know, that firearm is what bolstered them to commit their crimes. It gave them power. That's why criminals carry guns. For them to hand that over to somebody, they're handing over their power to you, and you're saying, well, okay, I'll go and hand this into the police. Now, I've been involved in taking black firearms through a process to try and legitimize them. This happens all the time in the collectors community, right? You'll get a phone call from somebody that said, I've just been doing up a house. We've taken out the walls and we've found these guns. What do I do now? And so, you know, there is not a process that the police have. It depends on who you talk to. And there's some very good arms officers that are out there who will walk you through a process to do that. But invariably, when you tip up at the police station and tell them that you've got this firearm, it's not on the register, it's been in the wall for could be 40, 50 years. You know, somebody brought it back from World War II or World War I. There's no process to legitimize that firearm. It's considered to be black and always black, but even when you go to hand in the firearm, all of a sudden you start getting questions about, well, how did you get it? Why didn't you do this? And now you're being treated as the suspect when actually you're the good citizen that's handing in an illegal firearm or finding a process that it can be maintained because it's, you know, might be a collectible piece or whatever. Now, the ones you're collecting, you know, a Glock and an AK style semi-automatic and a shotgun, they're not really collectible, but there isn't a process, and you get treated like a criminal when you try and hand it in. Is that your experience too, that you've had all these questions and you're thinking, well, why did I bother with this?
Yeah, I mean, it is the experience. You know, as you say, that there's not that there isn't a process, because on not this firearm, but the firearms I handed in before this one was about a month ago. The lady at the front desk at the Manukau police station said to me, "Oh, have you got firearms in those bags?" I said, "Yes, and I'd like to talk to a police officer, please. You know, someone that could manage this from here." She says, "Go and sit down just over there." And I sat down for 10 minutes with 2 illegal firearms in my bag, a sawn-off shotgun and a Glock. And I was thinking to myself, gosh, doesn't she not realize the seriousness of what I've actually got in my possession here? And so unprepared, no process, poor follow-up, and just poor engagement. Actually, when the police did come down, there wasn't any, "Oh, what have you got there?" It wasn't. I said, I actually confronted him. I said, "Excuse me, the way that you should start your conversation is, oh, hi, how are you? What's your name, sir?" And I said, "Well, my name's Kane." So I corrected this cop. I was quite upset with the way that he came out of the office and saw me in the reception area. Didn't even ask what my name was. Didn't ask where I was from. Just said, "What have you got there?" So I just corrected him and said, "Listen here, mate. Be better if you started the conversation with introducing yourself, asking who I am, where I'm from. That would be a good start." So, it's a hard case, how you have to sort of, you feel sort of victimized when you're trying to feel like a hero, but you're not a hero. You're actually, in some ways, you feel like you're the perpetrator or some sort of, why have you got those firearms, So it needs to be a bit of a change, because we don't want people like me feeling like, oh gosh, you don't go down there. They just treat you like you're, you're part of the problem. So I did ask to talk with the gang engagements unit. I know there's such a department of the police, but nobody's called me back since, it's been 3 weeks now, maybe 2.5 weeks. No contact at all from the police. So it's not going to stop me though, Cam. If another firearm gets handed in, I'm going through the same process again, because that's the only way I know is to get rid of that weapon in a way that it's not going to return back to the streets.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we get this all the time, at Antique Arms. We get phoned up by people. They've got firearms, their grandfather's died or whatever. They are clearing out boxes and, oh, hello, we've got, a Webley revolver, or we've got, different sort of fun. We've even had, submachine guns and stuff like that have turned up that they didn't even know Granddad had.
Wow.
They brought them back from World War II hanging over their shoulder, nobody questioned it. Now, all of a sudden, they've got this firearm and no ability to deal with it. They're too afraid to go to the police in case the police then decide to do exactly what they do when we go in there. I know of a case where some old guys had decided to get rid of their collection, etc. There's a whole lot of magazines for firearms. They now need to be registered, but there was at the start of the whole buyback situation, law changes, the police were very opaque with what the rules were. There's these 80-year-old guys that have got 10 or 15 magazines. They're actually worth a little bit of money, because now, ironically, by the police making them restricted and requiring to be, serialized, they've actually increased the value of them, because not everybody can have this little metal box with a spring in it. So they've increased the value, but they've got no ability to hand those in. The police then say to the dealers or whoever's got them, why have you got those? We want the names of the people that handed them in. We want to prosecute them. All of a sudden, here's some guys that are handing some stuff in, and the police want to go after them because they didn't hand it in 2 years ago. It's insane. Yeah. And it's demonizing and ostracizing people so that they no longer wish to deal with the police. Now, people like myself in the firearms community have had a long-standing, relationship with police that we considered to be good. Not anymore. People like me won't interact with the police. We'll insist that they follow the law. I had two cops turn up at my place armed with Glocks and tasers and vests on and everything. And they said, oh, we're just coming to inspect your safe. And I said, oh, that's a shame. And they said, why is that? And I said, well, I'm busy. And they said, well, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm talking to two idiots who don't understand the law. And they said, are you talking about us? And I said, yeah. You have to give me 7 days notice to come and inspect. You haven't done that, so you can go. See you later. And then they threatened me. And so the interactions that you have with police, that you're insisting that they follow the law, turns into a threat that this won't go well for you. So we sit here and we wonder why there's no respect for the police. Well, they don't have any respect for law-abiding citizens.
Well, that's right, Cam. And I've experienced it myself. As I do when I'm at the front desk, I tell them who I am, what organisation I'm from, so they get an understanding that, hey, hold on, this is the profile of the individual that's standing before us. But there's no credit given for that. If I was in the police and I was on the other end, I'd be trying to find Kane Warren, because I see that as an asset. I see that as an asset to keeping our streets safer. But I think there's been a shift in our police. They're lacking community engagement. And I know that for a fact, because a friend of mine that attends my fitness centre said to me, he is in the police and he's in the gang engagement unit, and he in Manukau here. And he came and see me just off record and said, hey, Kane, we just need some ideas on how we can engage the gangs. And if you don't mind, come and meet our seniors and maybe share some of your experiences. And I said to him, that's not going to work. That's not going to work, because your brand is not trusted. There's a big difference between the police, what you're saying, and where we are as people in our organisation. We have the trust and the engagement with the people. And I said, I won't be able to offer too much advice at all to your seniors, apart from the same thing that I'm telling you. You're not trusted. So my final advice to him was, you have to make some radical shifts and changes in order to be trusted, because they don't trust you on the streets. And why do they come to us? Well, because they know that we're trusted. If I tell the man that you hand these guns in, it's amnesty. It's amnesty. There's no names.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of breakdown, Cam, on police engagement in community. It's not working. It hasn't worked for me for the last 2.5 weeks after that firearms handed.
Yeah. That's just appalling. And it's easy to be fixed, but it's going to require time. The police, with their actions during COVID, the actions since the Christchurch massacre, they have destroyed trust in large segments of society. And their answer is to wallop us harder. If they're going to build trust with folks in the Man Up program, then they almost need to come down not wearing a uniform, participate in the program, earn the trust, and then they might find they can get a whole lot more guns back off the criminals that are out there, or ex-criminals that are wanting to go straight. I mean, let's face it, like I said, if they're handing over, a Glock is, that's an interesting firearm. I'd be interested to know if it was actually a police firearm that they've now recovered. Because the police have lost more Glocks than private citizens have lost Glocks.
Oh, no.
I mean, that's the crazy situation of things. And it seems that the police as an organization has a systemic problem that they refuse to acknowledge, and they just box on regardless. Maybe they need to do the Man Up program.
Yeah, well, it's a free advertisement to the New Zealand Police today. If you're out there today and you're needing to, recondition your mind and heart, then Man Up is a good place for you to come.
Now, you're standing in Manarewa electorate, aren't you? You're going to correct me, right? Yeah. So that's a hardcore Labour seat. It's never gone any other colour other than red. How are you finding door knocking and campaigning as a candidate in a deeply red seat?
Tide is turning for Labour in Manurewa. I know that for a fact because we've knocked thousands of doors.
Yeah.
We've visited plenty of businesses, local dairies, and because of the last 6 years of Labour-led government, and particularly the last 3 years, there's been a turn and a shift in the voters. It could be a swing vote, As you know, if they don't go red, they sometimes go blue. But the feeling is speaking to a few senior citizens in the community that have been Labour for ever since it's existed, basically, if they don't vote red, they don't vote at all. But I've been able to swing their candidate vote.
Right.
And so that's been interesting too, that they hold red, whether it goes back to George Hawkins or whatever. But when you talk to them about the experiences they've had, lockdowns, just left on their own, really, there's a lot of people hurting out there, Cam. And the door knocks have been quite slow for me personally because they've invited me inside for talks. They want to talk. And it's a little bit of it's like a Man Up session in itself. They're venting just their frustrations and hurts, some of their concerns, especially the elderly, actually, afraid to actually walk out on the footpath, go down to the local shops, afraid to be attacked or verbally abused. So I really was shocked. Maybe I've been living in a bubble. This campaign's really popped my bubble to really feel where people are actually at in terms of, like you said, where are they voting? There is a swing, and some go national, but there's also, as I say, Vision New Zealand. There's only a four-horse race in Manurewa. There was 11 candidates standing in the 2020 elections. This election is only 4 parties standing in the local general seat.
Yeah,
National Labour, Māori, and Vision New Zealand, myself.
With that swing that you're detecting, do you think that part of that is, like you say, if they only vote red, and if it doesn't look like they're going to get anywhere, then they don't vote at all? Do you think that there's going to be a lower turnout in Manurewa electorate this time round? Or do you think people are I detect a angry undercurrent amongst people on the street and voters, and they seem like they want to teach the government a lesson. a very harsh lesson. And you seem to be picking that up too, that there's people who want to talk. Cost of living is probably the biggest thing. And we get these politicians who you never see them on the streets for 3 years. And then for 6 weeks prior to the election, here they are eating sausage rolls and doing crazy things. And, do they think that we can't see that this is all a charade, that they're just pretending they care? Because that's the feeling that I get, that they don't care. They don't want to listen to us. They only do this every 3 years, and then we see them in the community finally in the election campaign. Where was all of the visits to the markets before that, or whatever they're doing? They're only there to open things and get their names put on plaques, it seems.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's why I think to the voters that are listening, we have to vote differently, and it's tough because the media doesn't help at all. It hosts debates with the main parties. It leaves all the minor parties out of key debates. You don't see democracy when the media are in control. And you're right. They come out in this last 6 weeks and they showboat, picking up rubbish, taking photos and selfies. That's been hard for me, Cam, because I know I'm a part of it too, because I'm campaigning as well. And I've been visiting a lot of our elderly homes, and how enriching that's been for me. But how sad it's been to ask the head nurses and that, hey, has any of the other candidates locally been to visit our elderly homes? They says, no one. So they pick and choose, They pick and choose where they go for their selfies and their profiling. They're not very consistent right across the board. Me, I've broken all barriers. I've gone to Buddhist temples. I've gone to visit our Muslim whānau. I've gone to the Black Power pad. I've gone to dairies, and I've gone to everyone else in between. Because to me, it's important that all people are engaged with a potential MP, so they can see this person, they can hear what their message is, and at least have that opportunity to say, okay, that fits me or that doesn't. But we haven't seen that consistently with Labour and National even in Manurewa.
I guess that's that polarisation again that's affecting that. It's the us and them mentality, which never in the history of the world has creating an us and a them situation ever worked out, without bloodshed or violence. But that's exactly what we're seeing. And we're seeing that with some of with your people from the Man Up program. There's an us and a them situation. You're attempting to create that, but the politicians and people, powers and be, are still creating this us and them situation, when in actual fact we need to look at it from, in my view, a perspective that there is no us and them, there's just a we. And we're all in this community together, including the criminals and the victims of those crimes. And we need to work out a way that we can create less criminals and that we can reconcile with everybody so that we all together have a community, not an us and them situation. It might sound hokey and a bit of motherhood and apple pie, but it shows the journey that I've been on in the last few years to get out of the polarization of politics. And it's why I'm doing this now on Reality Check Radio, that I can talk to people like yourself and learn that there are other ways to do things that may be better. And I think that's what we need to grow in our society. And that's why I think parties and candidates like yourself and people that are engaged in the community should be listened to. And it shouldn't have to be a knock them out, drag them out fight to get these ideas brought forward into society. We should be looking for what works and doing that, not just chucking millions of dollars or billions of dollars to solve a problem. I mean, if welfare solved poverty, we wouldn't have any poverty, would we?
That's true. And Cam, the thing is that in Manurewa, for example, I call them community champions. The engagement that I've had with social workers, with groups that are unsung heroes, they're not out there doing selfies and promoting themselves. They get on with the work and engaging with people. They're the community champions. If I had the opportunity to advocate for them, I would be resourcing them. Manurewa doesn't need any more policies. It just needs the backing and support that it deserves. The leadership's here, the engagement's here. They know how to engage with the whānau that are hard to reach. I know that for a fact. So that's what it's coming down to. The old saying is, leadership is the problem and leadership is the issue. And it's even reflected down on the ground here in this electorate of Manurewa. We need the right leadership.
Well, I know the electorate reasonably well because I went to primary school in the electorate. I lived in Manurewa for many, many, many years, up until secondary school, in actual fact. So, yeah, I know the electorate. I know the people. I well remember, ironically, it was Roger Douglas who came around and visited my father and said, "Oh, it's good to see you here, John. Now I know where I can come and throw stones on your roof." So that was an interesting experience as a young child to see a politician coming to talk to somebody who was in a different political party and saying, "Oh, look, this is where I can come and throw stones on your roof." It's funny though because I raised that with Roger Douglas once, and he can't remember ever saying it, but it was clear I was there, so I don't forget it, and neither does my father. So, but I know the electorate really well, and I wish you all the best for that. But the reality is, it's probably going to be a Labour victory in your electorate. But that doesn't mean that your ideas should stagnate, and it doesn't mean that you should stop doing what you're doing. And, if you want some help with the police in engaging around firearms, then I'm willing to come and help you on that as well. I know people in the firearms community that can assist and would be willing to assist. So you don't have to do it alone, that there are people out there that think that what you guys are doing is grand and necessary, and they're willing to help. I've been impressed learning about the Man Up program and talking with Brian and talking with Heka and yourself. And I think it is something that should be embraced, and I'll do whatever I can to help you do that.
Appreciate that, Cam, and I'll take you up on that with firearms with a man of your own experience, and we can work on that together. And I will reach out to you if the opportunity comes up again.
No, absolutely do that. Between the people I know and the people we can actually make a difference and do what the police should be doing in getting these firearms off the street. But I just like to thank you for coming on The Crunch. It's the last week of the election. You'll be able to have a rest on Sunday. Well, actually, you probably won't be. You'll be at church on Sunday. But, you've worked hard in the electorate, and I wish you well. And, I think there'll be some things that we can work on together as well.
Thanks, Cam, for giving us this opportunity this morning, and appreciate the work that you're doing too in the team, just giving us a platform to be heard. Thank you.
Well, we need to hear all voices, and it takes all types to make a community, and I just don't think that we should be shutting our ears and our eyes to what are good ideas. And so, that's what Reality Check Radio is all about. It's exposing listeners to new ideas and thinking of better ways to do things. So, once again, thanks for coming on The Crunch.
Well, that's awesome, Cam. And you can send me a Reality Check T-shirt. I'm a size large. Thanks, mate.
I'll
send you a Man Up one. We'll do a trade.
Do a trade. Oh, we should do it in person. Swap them over in person.
We'll do that.
Yeah. I am constantly astonished that politicians and bureaucrats refuse to engage with Man Up. How much better would it be to have people in prison go through the Man Up program while they're in prison before they rejoin society, rather than try and start their journey away from crime after they leave prison? I'm thoroughly impressed by the difference men like Kane can make helping other men with the Man Up program. Kia kaha, Kane. Now tell me your thoughts on what Kane had to say by emailing inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
Our text machine is now live. Send us your thoughts by texting your message to 2057. That's 2057. So get in touch with us now.
Join us on a special webinar for a night of politics with your favourite political commentators as we track the votes coming in and catch up with various parties around the country. Our election night party is online from 6:45 p.m. on election day, Saturday, 14 October. We're going to have an interesting night that night. We'll have various hosts coming in I'll be checking in from Northland. Peter Williams will be checking in from Europe. We're going to record absolutely everything that we can in an election night webinar. You can find out more and secure your spot by visiting our website at realitycheck.radio/election-party. That's realitycheck.radio/election-party. And a reminder, Foundation members will receive a complimentary invite direct to your inbox. If you're not yet a member, consider joining. Otherwise, grab your ticket at realitycheck.radio/election-party. Now I'm going to delve into the intriguing developments in the political landscape as reflected by the recent One News Varian poll results. The trend is crystal clear. New Zealand First is on the rise while national support appears to be shrinking. Winston Peters and his New Zealand First party have made significant gains, surging by 1% to reach 6% in the One News Varian poll. That's a gain of 1% in just 1 week. This boost has brought them comfortably above the parliamentary threshold, securing their position in the next government if this trend continues. And this marks a remarkable turnaround for the party that it was languishing at 3% just a few months ago. On the flip side, though, the National Party has seen a decline of 1%, dropping to 36% in these latest poll results. And if these numbers hold, National would secure 45 seats, well short of the 61 needed to form a government. And the ACT Party only gives them enough seats to get to 60, meaning that Christopher Luxon will find himself seeking support from New Zealand First. On the other side, though, they face even bigger challenges, with the Labour Party continuing its gradual decline down 1% to 26%, and that results in just 33 projected MPs. It would also mean there would be no list MPs for the Labour Party. So Grant Robertson and David Parker and some other senior Labour Party MPs would be out of a job. The Greens, however, have seen a slight uptick of 1% to 13%, and Te Pāti Māori has slid another 1% down to 2%, which would give them 2 seats, and it leaves that bloc very short of the 61 needed for a coalition. The poll also says that the minnow parties aren't getting anywhere, but it was notable that New Conservatives and NZ Loyal were recorded in this poll, but at just 1%. So those 2 million votes that Liz Gunn is claiming for her party must be some part of some sort of psyop where their supporters are telling fibs to the pollsters so they can surprise us all on polling day. Sadly, though, that is a fantasy. Now, I watched the debate last night, so you didn't have to. Talk about an unedifying spectacle, one where Chris Hipkins constantly shouted down Christopher Luxon, interrupted and performed like a naughty child in a desperate need of a pat on the back low enough and hard enough to make him start. The debate was about as illuminating as a candle in a howling gale at midnight, and we learned nothing other than Chris Hipkins likes to talk a lot about National, make wisecracks, and whine like a dive bomber over the target. Christopher Luxon, and trust me, I'm no fan of his, acted much more prime ministerial. I don't think a bag of weed would have made this debate even remotely interesting, but the benefit would be not having to look at it through the purple haze. Chris Hipkins at times was caught on camera looking like a gormless bobblehead. The way he leaves his mouth open and bobbles around makes him look like he's auditioning for the role of a flycatcher. And at times he puckered up his mouth so much as he reacted to Luxon's inane babbling that he resembled a cat's bum. Overall, though, Luxon definitely won this debate. I can't stand him, but he kept his cool and was hitting the balls well. Hipkins acted like a truculent teen trying to fire shots against a reasonable parent that doesn't take the bait. Sadly, we were not enlightened by anything other than these two seem to agree about an awful lot and are merely arguing over how they'd implement something. One thing we know for sure, though, is that Christopher Luxon gave an emphatic no to compensating vax-injured people, and that makes him a firm no for me. Only one more debate, thankfully, and I think that these TV debates' time has passed. They don't add anything to the political discourse, and they just take up an awful lot of time and are ultimately annoying to the viewers.
This is The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy, right here on RCR.
David Farrar is probably New Zealand's best pollster, and I never bet against David's reckons. So we're going to take a look at the various campaigns, crunch some numbers from the polls, and get a feel for where David thinks things will land on Saturday night. Welcome back to The Crunch, David. Good to have you here with 2 days left to go before Election Day to analyse where we're at with the polls and any insights that you've got from what you're seeing.
Yeah, look, great to be back, and it's very different to 2020 in a couple of ways. The first is, well, obviously Labor's not going to have a landslide. In fact, they have the biggest drop in support of any political party since we had the two-party system in the 1930s. The biggest drop previously has been 12%, and they're looking to drop somewhere between 20 and 24%. But very few people have advance voted. Last time, it was actually all over by Thursday. 1.9 million people advance voted. This time, it's like 600,000 only. So, what we'll be looking for is what the turnout is, basically. That might make that 1 or 2% difference to some of those parties.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you is what's your gut feel on the turnout, what it's looking like, or what you think it's going to look like come 7 p.m. when those numbers start coming in?
I think turnout will be pretty low, definitely lower than last time, maybe even lower than 2017. Because, look, if you're a government supporter, they're running a fair campaign against the opposition because they've got nothing to campaign on. So their supporters, some of them will be motivated by fear, but the ones who are the more swinging voters won't be. The last 2 weeks of the campaign hasn't focused on issues that matter to people, like cost of living. It's all been about, who might be in coalition? Are they scary? Your numbers don't add up. And frankly, that turns people off. So people I'm hearing from is just like they're over this. They just want a result. They want to move on, etc. There are people very excited about changing the government, but I don't think it's going to be anything like 2020 or even 2017 turnout-wise.
That's the interesting thing, isn't it? We've got a government that is despised, really. I mean, there's no other word to describe it. It's an amazing fall from grace from 2020 to destroy your vote by, half.
Yep.
I don't think I've ever seen anything like this before.
Normally losing 5% is considered pretty bad. 5%. If you go from 46 to 41%, you're like, oh, wow, that was a terrible result. If you go from 50 to 26%, I mean, that's just, unheard of.
But given that, what we're looking at is a National Party that doesn't look like they're going to crack 40% or return to the John Key levels of support. You've got the ACT Party in the Taxpayers Union Courier poll dropping 5%, which is huge.
Yep.
Are we likely to see a couple of gotchas out there with some surprise results?
People are leaving Labor for different reasons. Those who are leaving for economic reasons have probably gone to National somewhat. Those who have left because they think it doesn't stand for anything have gone to the Greens. Those who are upset that they've sort of talking down co-governance have gone to the Maori Party, and those who hate co-governance are going to Act in New Zealand First. Normally, when you lose support, it is often just to the major opposition party, but here they're losing it for different reasons to different parties. All of the polls so far, and we'll see what Thursday night brings with probably the final TVNZ poll, show that neither National ACT or Labour, Greens, Te Pāti Māori are going to get to 61 seats. So New Zealand First is going to be, again, the polls have all had them over 5%. Now, look, you can have a bad turnout, if it's a cold winter's day and, don't turn out. But at this stage, is looking like not quite Winston decides, because he's already decided. He said he won't go with Labour.
Yeah.
But it looks like he'll be needed to make a government. Which
is interesting given the full-on attacks that we're seeing now against New Zealand First. We saw the ACT Party run billboards that had a nice picture of Winston Peters and some words beside it that most people could easily think, well, that's that nice Mr. Peters has been saying.
Yeah.
Just crazy stuff.
Shouldn't have attacked New Zealand First, should have focused on your own policies. And Labour's, of course, attacking Winston now, but not to knock Winston out. They realising they can't win, want Winston there, because they then think that will give them more stuff to rail against an opposition that, they could then hopefully come back after one term, etc. So Hipkins and co are trying to use New Zealand First as a wedge to scare people off National, but they actually, and some of their supporters are probably tactically even going New Zealand First, saying, well, we'd rather have Winston there than a National ACT government. So this will be the fascinating thing, how much tactical voting is there.
Yeah, I mean, their ad was showing Winston Peters with Christopher Luxon in his pocket, I thought would appeal to a wide range of people who don't actually like National and want to see somebody controlling Christopher Luxon's globalist tendencies. It's just crazy. So this is an election where I haven't seen many of the norms other than seeing the big parties slide in the polls, as is usual in the last closing weeks of the election.
We've never before seen a government run such a negative campaign against the opposition. They sort of have to, because their track record's so abysmal. Often, of course, you part the press releases, etc. But if you look around the country at the moment, Labour are running blue billboards, with quotes from national MPs on there. They're running stuff about Winston, and their mates in the CTU have run a $400,000 campaign personally against Chris Luxon. And, that is not what normally happens. Normally the government's like, hey, we've achieved a lot. Don't put her at risk. They're untested. Here's our policies for the next term. But this is like, we've given up on trying to convince you we've been a good government. We're just trying to scare you off the alternative.
It's just hilarious watching it. I mean, they're breaking all the rules. I mean, it's not just Labour. National's doing it too. They're breaking all the rules in the norms of political advertising, constantly talking about their opponent. They're not selling the features and benefits of their own policies so much. In the last 3 weeks, the entire election narrative has been about Winston Peters and New Zealand First. I mean, Winston must be loving this.
He is, I think. But what Winston's always needs is relevance. The worst thing for Winston is, they're not going to make 5%, so I'll have say, I'll have might. If anyone might surprise on the upside, New Zealand First could. The polls differ a bit whether he's in the 5, 6 or 7% range, etc. But, the more publicity he gets, the better he could do. The other one I'd watch out for is the Greens. They don't normally beat their polls, but I think so many younger progressive voters are switching to the Greens, and that that they could surprise on the upside too.
I think that'll be a fleeting, almost a high tide, really, because those voters are probably tribal Labour, and they're saying, well, we're going to. And so you see, like James Shaw in the debate the other night, standing there next to David Seymour and sniping away at him, but also claiming that they were going to have the most MPs ever, and a government with Green ministers was going to be fabulous. And nobody pulled them up, not even Patrick Gower or whoever else was running it. I can't even remember who it was now. It might have been Rebecca Wright. Nobody pulled them up and said, are you checking the polls, pal? Because you're not going to have any ministers. And so this is probably a high tide. event for the Green Party, which at the next election should see them slip away again.
Yeah, look, it could well be. I mean, we've seen to a degree, actually, even where it's not an election result, but at one stage, we're looking to maybe get up to 20 MPs. And in the latest round of polls, they might only get one or two more than they've currently got. So you should never get too confident and comfortable about how many MPs you'll have.
If we're watching, from home on election night, what are the key indicators that you'll be looking for as a polling expert, and the people who are your clients will be calling and saying, what do you think, David? Where are we going with this on these numbers? And sort of what's the time frame that you're likely to say, if we haven't had this indicated by this time, then we should be worried about that or that?
Well, it's all changed a bit with the advanced voting. It used to be your first hour or so are all the small rural booths coming in, and then you have the more representative booths, and then the last booths to come in are the big South Auckland booths, etc. So I remember I used to sort of have a spreadsheet that if we're at this at 7:30 at night, will be this at 9 o'clock, 9:30. But now with the advanced votes, you may have, it won't be 2/3, but 40% of the electorate will know those results by 8 o'clock. And what I'll just be looking for is really just quite simple. Where's New Zealand First?
Yep.
If New Zealand First is under 5%, then that's huge. That changes things dramatically. And then it's going to be what is National and ACT up around 60, 61 seats projected there. Because once you know if they are or are not on track to get 60, 61 seats, then you know it's Winston going to be holding that balance of power. There would have to be a major polling upset, and of course we haven't seen Thursday night's poll yet, for Labour, Greens, Māori Pahi to go from 54 to 61 seats. So the other thing to watch out for is, well, two things now. Special and overseas votes, we won't know them for 10 days. Yep. Last election, National lost 2 seats to Labour and Greens. Most elections, they lose 1. There's a theory, which I hold to, that a lot of Kiwis overseas hate Labour because they locked them out of the country and made them try and go give birth in Kabul rather than let them into MIQ. Yep. So they might not get the same pickup. And of course, we now also have the Port Waikato by-election, which will give National an extra MP too. So Pahi vote, really it's just look at, will New Zealand First be making it, and will National and ACT between them be looking like they can get close to 60, 61 seats? What the split is between Labour and Greens, it sort of matters to them, but not in terms of that overall outcome. I guess there's 3 or 4 electorate seats people be interested in. Top are, saying they can win Ireland. The poll hasn't shown that, but that would affect the election significantly if they did win Ireland. But we should get early results for that quite clearly. Northland, I don't think again is close, but that's been the only hope for Democracy New Zealand. Yeah. I'm not sure they'd even go list MP in on current polling, though, if they came in. Māori seats will be interesting because if Māori Pahi don't win one of them, but I think they'll win at least one, then they don't get into Parliament because they're polling under 5% too. It won't affect the election, but Tamaki's looking really interesting between Simon O'Connor and Brooke Van Velden, 2% in my latest poll.
So let's just touch on the Maori seats, because there's a poll that's been released that shows that Rawiri Waititi is twice as far ahead as the Labour candidate.
Yeah.
You've done polling in Maori seats. Is it more difficult than other seats to poll for? And are the polls accurate for Maori seats?
They are less accurate. Yeah. So we're in a normal... New Zealand polls tend to be accurate within 3% or so, right? So if we say you're going to get 47%, you won't be too surprised if it's 45 or 49. Electorate polls only have 500 people, so they're sort of a 4 to 5% margin of error. So in a poll in, say, Tamaki, where we had O'Connor ahead by 2%, if Brooke wins by 5%, won't be surprised. If O'Connor wins by 5%, won't be surprised. Add then onto that the unique challenges of the Māori seats, where you have more people in deprived areas, hard to get them on phone or cell phone or internet panels. You can have language issues getting through to them, and you also find it harder. Like if I'm polling Tamaki, I just phone people who live in the geographic area. But to poll people in a Māori seat, what we actually do is we look at, do they live in an area where over half the census population is Māori? So basically, there's more ways where your sample can be wonky. Having said that, so can you get results where they're 10% different? Yes. That happened last election, partly because we polled 3-4 weeks before the elections. Jacinda came along. In this particular seat, though, his lead is so large, 25% or so. Yeah, it would be pretty stunning for that to go the other way.
Yeah, of course, there's always the risk that people can answer a telephone and give you a poll, give you an answer, but actually bothering to go and take their card down to the polling station and vote is another thing entirely.
Yeah, and more people live in very rural areas in some of those seats where there's not as good access to polling places, etc. So there definitely is quite a bit of uncertainty over those, except, as I say, I think in Wairiki, it would be quite a surprise. Really what the Māori want to avoid is any candidate in that seat dying before Friday, because if they did, like Port Waikato, there'd be a by-election. But then if it's the only seat they were in line to win and they don't get there on election night, they'd actually be out of Parliament altogether.
Well, I guess that is a risk, but, with only 2 days left to go, it's something that might not happen, and there's a good chance that is the case.
One constitutional lawyer did point out that if you really wanted to cause mischief, you could go around the hospices and sign all these people up as candidates in electorates where you don't like the MPs, and have them all die or do euthanasia the week before the election, and suddenly you might have 30 seats that have to go to a by-election because of this rule that if a candidate dies, even if that candidate had no chance of winning, it means you can't carry on with the election.
Yeah, I just find it a very strange rule, but I guess it's been sitting there on the books and never had to be used. And,
I can't recall it being used before, no.
No. Just going back to the, 7 p.m. where we start, the Electoral Commission will release the advanced voting numbers. They've collated those already, haven't they?
No, they start, I think, either midday or 9 a.m.
Yeah, but they're doing it on election day, right? So they're ready to go by 7 p.m. that they'll start releasing the numbers. They'll have some totals. Let's say 800,000 people voted. If we see when that's released by the Electoral Commission that there's going to be a change of government, with that many people already voted, does the laws of large numbers, all the calculations come into effect? If we're seeing that with 800,000 votes, there's a likelihood that that's going to continue in all the other votes that come through.
It tends to, but it can vary. 2017, the advance votes were pretty similar to the election day votes. 2020, Labor did better with advance votes than election day votes. Right. Their support has had Decide locked in. It's possible this time that National might do a bit better with advance votes for those who want to change the government, have made their mind up. And Labor possibly do a bit better with their scare campaign, the last minute voters. So yeah, you can't say it's going to be all over by 8 o'clock, because I don't think it's going to be so much, okay, is there going to be a change of government? But it will be, we need to wait to see what type of government it's looking to be.
What it looks like.
Is it National Act New Zealand First? How also, of interest is how many ministers will Labor lose? Are they going to, they might only get 3 or 4 list MPs if they have a really bad day.
Or none.
That would be interesting.
I mean, there is a chance of that decapitation strategy working against the Labor Party, where they don't get any list MPs because they've won all the electorates they predicted to win, and their vote is so low that they actually create an overhang, and then there's no list MPs, which means that David Parker and some other senior MPs would just disappear.
And Grant Robertson, Andrew Little, Ayesha Verrill, they hold, I think, 46 electorate seats at the last election. Most polls have them getting 35 seats. So they have to lose at least 12 electorates to get even one list MP.
And are they likely to lose 12 electorates?
I think they are likely to use 12, but potentially maybe not a huge amount more than 12. If their campaign in Wellington, if they keep Ohario and Hutt South, for example, because Wellington's always very red, you've got that.
Yeah, just doing a quick count, there's Upper Harbour, they're probably likely to lose that.
I'd say so.
Mangakeke, they're probably going to lose that. That's 2. So, we're on the way there. They're going to probably lose both Hamilton seats.
Yeah.
Those are bellwether seats. If you lose Hamilton, probably. Yeah, if you lose Hamilton, then you're losing the country. If you lose Auckland, you're losing the country. So those
not that many marginal seats in Auckland though. Mangakeke and Northcote.
Northcote, they'll lose Northcote.
What's that?
They'll lose Northcote.
Well, I'm not sure they were going to until all of Shannon Halbert's former staff came out and he's a terrible bully. I can't imagine that helps you in the election campaign.
No, not entirely.
Yeah.
So, the key indicators then for you are to see what the lay of the land is from that, the big dump from the Electoral Commission straight up. And then you'd be looking at some key seats like the Hamilton seats, like New Plymouth, Napier, perhaps, to see what those are doing. And if those are lost to Labor, then we're definitely seeing a change of government.
Yeah, the provincial seats, make up, they combine the provincial cities even bigger than Auckland.
Yeah.
So that's your Hamiltons, your New Plymouths, your Napier, your Nelsons, Palmy North, Invercargill, Dunedin, etc. And some of those are safe Labor, Dunedin, etc. But if you've got these massive swings in Hamilton, New Plymouth, Tauranga, that's going to affect the party vote.
Yeah, big time. And then, of course, famously, the Labor Party president at the time was talking about these big booths in South Auckland coming in. If we're seeing a low turnout that's coming in the booth numbers in the South Auckland electorates, then Labor's toast too, aren't they?
Yeah, they really, unless the polls are all wrong or all change in the last couple of days, they need to win the turnout game. And to be fair to Labor, they usually have a good turnout game. But last time, Jacinda Mania, pretty easy to turn people out. What is Chris Hipkins offering South Auckland? Well, he's scaring them against a change of government, but I don't think he's offering them that much, to be honest.
Well, I noticed he was campaigning wearing a black jacket the other day rather than his red Labor jacket.
Yeah.
And I thought, if your leader won't even wear your colours, you've got a serious problem. So let's crack into some predictions. Let's talk about some key electorates and what that means for the minor parties. We've talked about Ilam. Look, I don't think that Top's going to win that. I just can't see that happening in a million years.
To win, they need to get national voters as well as Labor voters. And they haven't really made a good case for why national people should split their vote, because Top's not promised to go with national.
Well, Top, no one actually knows what they stand for. I mean, I can't believe they're still around. It'd be like the Internet Party still being around and campaigning.
Oh, that'd be great.
Northland, we're going to see a national MP there, aren't we? There's been,
Grant
4...
McCallum should win fairly handsomely. What will be interesting maybe is who comes second. Will it be Willow Jean Prime, the incumbent MP, or could Shane Jones even come second?
Well, if Shane Jones comes second, then that's a good indicator for New Zealand First. But yeah, I mean, it'd be a silly man to bet against National winning that electorate. I mean, yes, we can point to 2020, but 2020 was an aberration. So the hopes of democracy in New Zealand, I mean, the 4 polls have shown that up there in that electorate that there's no way that anything's happening other than a march towards the blue team.
Yeah, they've all been consistent. Different results, but same outcome.
Yeah. What about in your polling? Have you detected this hidden 2 million votes that Liz Gunn is saying that they're going to get for NZ Loyal?
No. There are a few percent saying other parties, but the problem is that I can't even list all the anti-vax parties. There's so many now, or anti-mandate parties. I think you've got the Leighton Baker Party, you've got Democracy NZ, you've got, is Liz Gunn's one Loyal, is it?
Yeah, NZ Loyal.
NZ Loyal, and you've got the Freedom Coalition, you've got Vision New Zealand's part of that, you've got the Outdoors and Recreation Party part of that, etc. So I think all those votes will either be wasted or will go to a party like New Zealand First that I think is sympathetic to their concerns about what happened, even if not as focused on it as Liz Gunn is.
Yeah, well, Liz Gunn's saying at every public meeting that the indications are that they've got 2 million people voting for them. How many voters are there in a general election anyway?
3 to 3.5 million. So there'll be a majority government if that's right.
Right. So she's claiming they're going to have enough votes to be like the Labour Party after 2020.
Yes.
And you're not picking
the problem is they only have 3 list candidates.
2.
So if you're actually a fan of small parliament, you should hope they get 60% of the vote, because then Parliament will go from 120 MPs to around 70 or so.
Look, all politicians are charlatans to a certain extent. They'll say whatever it takes every 3 years to get elected. It's the job of the news media to hold them to account, and we don't see that happening very often. But for these minor parties, I've come to the conclusion now, and it's rather strong, my views on it, but it's rather deceitful to be talking about creating this huge wave of support when it doesn't even show up in the polls. And there's no way that I can accept that all the polls are bent. Some of them occasionally have a slight aberration in the results compared to others. But what we're looking at with all of the polls is the numbers are there or thereabouts.
They're remarkably consistent this time round. There's 7 or 8 different polling companies, and they're all getting very similar results.
Yeah, so based on that, the chances of NZ Loyal getting even 1% are very slim, aren't they?
They're certainly not going at 5. I mean, when you're down at around the 0.5% mark, whether it's 0.5% or 1%, it can vary, but it's going to be nowhere near 5%.
So the reality is we're going to see the National Party, the Labour Party, ACT Party, Green Party, maybe the Maori Party, depends if they win a seat or not, and New Zealand First in Parliament, and a government that will likely be a National ACT and New Zealand First coalition of some description.
Yeah, I think that's the most likely outcome at this stage.
It rather begs the question then why National came out over the weekend and did what I saw as a Hail Mary and desperate attempt where they started raising the spectre of a second election. And as Winston Peters pointed out on breakfast television, that's never happened in the entire history of New Zealand's voting since 60 something. It did seem desperate. What's your view on that?
Look, you look at what the incentives are. If you're the major party, to be blunt, They would like to be a single-party government like Labour was, and almost like John Key had, where you have like 58, 59 seats and your minor partners, you give them a cup of bones, basically.
Yeah.
Failing that, two-party coalitions, let's just put personalities aside for a moment, are better than three-party coalitions because you only need to agree with one other party and you can get on there. So their incentive is we'd much rather have a two-party one. Add on the fact that Seymour and Peters especially get pretty fractious with each other, and Seymour has said he'd never support a government with New Zealand First in cabinet. What National's worried about is that if people think it's inevitable New Zealand First, it will be part of a National-led government, they might bleed some support back to Labour. So it's not actually so much anti-New Zealand First, it's responding to Labour's scare campaign effectively is what they're trying to do.
Yeah. But I guess they have to do that when they're not approaching 40% in the polls. If you're over 40%, it changes the narrative a little bit, but they're not, and they don't look like they've been any. I mean, this is where someone needs to sit down and say to Chris Bishop and Christopher Luxon, remember when you said the goal, 3 months out from the election was to get over 40%. How'd you go on that?
Yeah. National's votes actually holding up in most of the polls reasonably well.
Yep.
It's more that ACT have been losing support, like in the Courier TU poll. National actually went up 1%, but ACT went down 5%, New Zealand First up 3%. So to a degree, I think, National had been, well, even 35, 36% is enough if ACT gets 12%, but if ACT's only getting 9%, suddenly it's not enough.
Do you think there's a risk that, well, it's not a risk is probably the wrong word, is there a chance that ACT could be outpolled by New Zealand First on election day?
Yeah, there is a chance. I won't call it a high chance, but if one's polling 7% and one 9%, that is getting into territory where if one has good turnout and the other doesn't, there could be a small lead to New Zealand First. Not likely, but not
it's not zero,
thing which would be, I never saw that coming.
Yeah. So there is a possibility, but it's a small possibility.
Yeah,
well, that's a shame because I've got some bets on that. But anyway, it's an interesting campaign, and like you and I have been following politics for a long, long time, and I'm struggling to pick what this is like. And I put that to Winston Peters the other day, and he couldn't give me an example. He said it's not like 2002. Morris Williamson said the same thing. It's not like 2002, but it's not like 1990 either. But some of the results will be like Labour halving their support is massive compared to 1990, where a landslide election was won by Jim Bolger, but it was only about a 12% swing.
Like a few months ago, I thought it was looking like 2005 election. Labour and National very close to each other, will come down to the wire. Then as they started to fall away Labour, I was thinking, is it maybe like 2002? But as Winston's come back in, actually, have a look at the 1996 election. National got 34%, and they're polling around 36, 37, not too far off. Labour got 28% in their election. They're polling around 27, 28. New Zealand First isn't going to they got 13% that time, but they're certainly well above the threshold. ACT got over 5% that time. They're above the threshold. And if you substitute Greens for the Alliance, it's probably more similar to 96 than any other. The thing I pick up is, look, people are desperately unhappy with the government. They're desperately unhappy with the country, but they're uncertain about what the change should be, what to change to.
And that then leads, if it's looking like 1996, and David Seymour's attitude in the last few days where he's reiterated his threat to sit on the crossbenches and choose which policies and what things he's going to fund. Seems rather dangerous position for him to paint himself into, having that together with his he'll never support a government where Winston Peters is in cabinet, where ACT can hardly go and support the Labour Party and the Green Party in any of their policies. He runs the risk that Christopher Luxon thinks that, well, actually, it's probably easier to deal with Winston Peters and we'll just throw a couple of bones to the ACT Party, but where else are they going to go?
Look, it's going to come down to what each party gets. If a month ago, if it was looking like ACT getting 13%, New Zealand First 5%, then that 13% party has a lot of sway. If, though, it's ACT gets 9%, Winston gets 7%, or even closer than that, then yes, Luxon will have different dynamics at play in trying to put government together. I think for my one, because ACT have ruled out supporting New Zealand First in cabinet, New Zealand First, if that holds, will stop ACT going into cabinet.
Yeah.
And do you do ministers outside cabinet? Well, maybe, but then you have to defend the government even though you're not run the cabinet table. So they may end up with a national minority government which has to do confidence and supply agreements and get every law agreed to independently by both ACT and New Zealand First. And that would be very challenging.
It would be a disaster, actually. But yeah, that's the thing that I found with Luxon's messaging over the weekend, that we may have a second election if we can't do a deal. This is a guy that's been touted to the electorate as this amazing businessman who's worked in these huge corporations getting deals done. And now he's admitting overtly, not just tacitly, not even hinting, he's admitting overtly that we might not be able to get a deal done, kind of popping that bubble of that he's this competent business person who can get deals done. Because I know that Winston Peters will do a deal. He'll do a deal with the devil if it's necessary, right? And so what you're left with really is David Seymour on the outside being petulant when things are so important for this country to get right. I mean, our economy's on its knees. We've got a large segment of the community that are work shy and don't even want to go into the office, preferring to work at home with Zoom, etc. There's just massive, massive structural problems that are occurring in New Zealand that are going to need to be fixed up. And we've got a couple of petulant schoolboys throwing their toys out of the cot. It doesn't really fill you with confidence, does it?
Oh, look, I think they will negotiate and get an agreement. I think it's pre-election rhetoric where it's trying to just say, look, we'd rather have a two-person government than a three-person government. But what they were partly doing is there is also a small chance, I don't think it's a big chance, of a hung parliament where, you could have National ACT New Zealand First with 60 seats and Labour Green Māori Party with 60 seats. And because for the first time ever, we don't actually have a party in the middle that could go either way because everyone's ruled the other side out, that's where you could get a second election scenario. Except now we're going to get 121st MP in the Port Waikato by-election. So that shouldn't be an active scenario.
A sensible way forward for Christopher Luxon, surely, would be to get those two in a room and bash their heads together, get them to agree to work together and form a coalition that gives you a comfortable majority where you can take a minister being sacked and throwing his toys, or somebody dying and having a by-election, or any number of vagaries that can cause a by-election, and therefore your one-seat majority disappears.
I'm of the belief that even if National ACT got 61 seats, they should and would offer confidence and supply agreement at least to New Zealand First, because you're absolutely right. 67 seats is much better than 61. If they don't have 61 seats, then you need to be coming to agreement. Well, I'm not sure, though, they'll all sit around in a room. If you look at what Winston did in 17, he wouldn't negotiate with the Greens. He said, I'll negotiate with Labour, and it's Labour's job to make sure their agreement with the Greens is consistent with what they agree with us. Yeah. So you might have that Nationals meeting in the morning with New Zealand First and in the afternoon with ACT, and trying to sort of get consistency there. Personally, I would have thought all three in a room together would be easier, but sometimes optics, they don't want to be seen directly negotiating with each other.
Yeah. What about the line the National Party's been running with their radio ads, TV ads, and print ads, where they're saying, we could have an election and there could be 8 weeks of negotiations and the country can't afford this. Now, my neighbour upstairs where I live, he was running that line 2 days before it hit the papers and the radio. So it's clearly a line that the National Party has pushed out to its members to say. He's rather, stupidly ran the line with me. And I said, well, hang on, we've had 6 years of nothing. What's another 6 to 8 weeks? It seems a specious argument to run.
It plays to that people don't like uncertainty. So that's what it plays to. But I'm a bit more relaxed over how long they'll take, because someone who's been involved in a number of negotiations made the point. This is your only time in a 3-year period where politicians sit around a table deciding policies with no officials in the room. And so don't worry if it takes an extra week, because this is, if you want good policy outcomes, this is actually your best opportunity to actually get good policy delivered, because once you're actually in government, then it's far hard. Everything has to be done through cabinet papers, official advice, 6-month consultations, etc. So I'm more interested in the quality of any agreements rather than how long they take.
Yeah, I mean, I'm of the same opinion. I don't actually care how long it takes. I mean, in Germany, it took 3 months. In Israel, they've had multiple governments. They had to have 4 elections to finally get the result that they've got now. So I think, if it takes 4 to 6 weeks, and remember 10 days is taken up by waiting for the special votes. But if it takes 4 to 6 weeks to get an agreement where the majority of each party's policies are supported in some way or another, then isn't that a good result for New Zealand that we took that time to do that?
Yeah, look, if the quality outcome is good, that's the most important thing. I don't think it will take as long as usual, because if you accept Winston at his word, he's not going to be doing what he's done on 3 other occasions, where he sits down with National and Labour, and they sort of play them off against each other and see who can get the best deal. He should only be sitting down with National. Around National, of course, we'll be meeting with Act 2, but by its nature, I would have thought negotiating with just one major party should be a lot quicker than negotiating with 2.
Yeah, that's what I would have thought. But, I've raised this question privately with Winston when I had a whiskey and cigar night with him. And I said to him, look, everyone thinks you're lying and you're full of shit and that you will negotiate with Labour. And he put down his cigar and he looked at me across the table and he says, listen to me here, Cam. I am not doing a deal with those people at all. And he was emphatic about it, and he was pounding the table when he did it. That is the feeling of animus that he has towards the Labour Party, and I've never seen that before.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is the first time he's been so explicit. I do understand why, because in the past he has been tricky. Like in 96, he never said he wouldn't go with National, but he said, I want to get rid of the national government. And then when he did a deal with them, he said, well, I did get rid of them. It's now a National New Zealand First government. And yeah, technically didn't lie, but that's why people are a bit there. But the fact he is at 100 public meetings said, I will not support Labour, I won't do supply and confidence. My belief is he will only negotiate with National. Where it could get interesting, though, is what if there is too big a gulf between what you can get ACT to agree to and what you can get New Zealand First to agree to? Could Winston, after 4 or 5 days of negotiating with National, if he really can't get anything satisfactory, then could he say, well, I'm going to talk to the other side? Unlikely, but not necessarily impossible.
I mean, if you look at the policy prescriptions of New Zealand First and National, there's not too much different. I mean, there's a couple of things that are probably not going to fly. But the biggest sticking point, I think, would be between National and ACT, when you've got ACT who is emphatic that they're going to have a referendum on co-governance. Now, I'd argue you actually don't need to have a referendum on co-governance because we had an election and the parties that supported co-governance lost. But David Seymour's dogmatic about that and emphatic about it. I can
understand why, though, because, yes, they lose this election, but in 3 or 6 years, they'll come back and they'll take that as a mandate to go even more radical.
But they'll still do that anyway, even if you had it.
Well, if it's a referendum that will entrench a law defining, I do quite like.
Well, that's a different proposition, isn't it? Because normally our referendum, the politicians say, "Thanks very much, that's nice," and then totally ignore it.
Yeah. It needs to be an entrenched referendum. So it's binding on courts, it's binding on the government, it's binding on Parliament. And the only way you could overturn that is another referendum. So that could be a useful outcome, would be ACT have said this. If Winston's the one who says, well, I'll only support her if it's a binding referendum, so the people should decide, not the politicians. That could be, one of the potentially good outcomes of coalition negotiations.
It could be. And the other thing that I was thinking too is that Christopher Luxon, he's desperately wet, really. He's quite liberal. I mean, he's more left-wing than Helen Clark in many respects.
Not as left-wing as Jim Bolger. No one
as left-wing as Jim Bolger. That's one of the reasons why I never support a republic. As long as Helen Clark and Jim Bolger are still alive, I will never support a republic. But anyway, I can see a benefit for Christopher Luxon to have New Zealand First, where their first 3 MPs are all Maori, with Winston Peters, Shane Jones, and Casey Costello. And they're saying things that Christopher Luxon can't possibly say. And they do things that Christopher Luxon can't possibly do. And so to bring New Zealand First in, and then also there are some things that ACT and David Seymour can do, again, being Maori, that they can say in this space, that the National Party can say, well, we agreed to do it in the coalition agreement, but what they say is up to them. It allows him to have a government that will do the necessary hard stuff without negatively impacting the National Party.
Potentially, but will also come down, like, on the co-governance side. Yes, when that message comes from someone like Winston or Shane or Casey, it's harder for the media to attack it as racist than if it comes from a European politician, even though it shouldn't, but this is the reality. But what National, I think, will be most focused on is we've got a cost of living crisis. They've got a tax and welfare package to help people with that. Will they be able to get that through their coalition partners? Because it won't help them if, yes, we can have, more vocalism on co-governance, if at the end of the day, people 6 months after the election think that nothing's changed and that they're not getting, that support they need to be able to afford food and petrol.
Yeah, I mean, I think Winston's got a good idea of having a mini budget within, fairly quickly, because I think that the government has massaged the books to suit an agenda. And, I know that they, this is the crazy stuff about Grant Robertson. He's saying if you vote for the National Party and ACT, then there's going to be cuts to government services, right? But, just 6 weeks before the election, he had all of the heads of departments and was cutting $4 billion of spending out so that they could get the pre-fu calculations to be sort of balanced. But those cuts seem to have been okay.
And the CTU doesn't campaign on those cuts. No. Yes, it's total hypocrisy. If Labor cuts spending, it's good and it won't impact anything. If National cuts spending, though, it will affect frontline services. Total bullshit and hypocrisy, because if spending was that correlated to frontline services, we'd have the best health system in the world. They're spending 60% more on the health system than 2017, yet ED waiting times, 5 times as many people aren't being seen, surgical waiting lists, immunisation, every
mental health statistics.
Indicator They've got less mental health beds despite $1.9 billion package, etc. So, it is bull, basically. But it's all they've got is fear.
Fear, spin, negativity. And I thought 2014 was a pretty bad election for negativity from the Labour Party, but this one's out of the park. But it never works. Like, going negative never works. You can go negative on one or two issues, but on everything, it just never works.
No, but it's called being desperate, and they're just hoping that, it will have enough of an impact to make Labour seem like they haven't lost so badly.
Yeah, desperation is a stinky cologne, though, isn't it?
Yes.
All right, just to wrap up then, what's your prediction on the numbers, headline numbers?
For seats or votes?
Now, let's talk votes, then we'll talk seats slightly separately.
Yeah. Well, at the public polls we've seen, National is mid to high 30s, etc. They'd be very happy if it got to high 30s. Labour is ironic, but if they got 30%, they'd probably be delighted. They shouldn't be. That's terrible. But there's something psychologically about getting a result in the 20s, which is very damning. I haven't seen any polls really having them except Roy Morgan under 25. So they're most likely is that high 20s, maybe mid 20s on a bad result. Greens, I would be surprised if they got below 10. They really seem to be picking up a lot of support from Labour. 15 would be their high point. So probably if you sort of think halfway, probably around 12 for the Greens. ACT is difficult because I think it is still quite volatile there. It would have to be a pretty bad night for them not to get at least what they got last time, 8% or so. But, now probably even getting above 10% would be a relatively good outcome for them, I think, when you look at the polls. I mean, some of them have had them at 10, 11, others at 9, etc. Psychologically, double figures is good. Maori Party might surprise people with its party vote. It could well get 3 to 4%. That could get them 4 or 5 MPs.
That'd be interesting to see.
And New Zealand First, my last poll had them at 6.9. So in that 6 to 7 range, maybe better if they get that momentum from being talked about all the time.
6.9 is 7, so they could get another % and be at around 8. That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
8. Imagine them on 8 and New Zealand First on 9. That's going to be interesting.
It will be interesting. Again, I think turnout's going to be quite critical, making sure your supporters actually vote, because I think a lot of people are a bit over it.
Well, I think a lot of people are a lot over it. They've had 6 years of, the first 3 years was average government, to be fair. The last 3 years has been appalling government. And there's going to be some retribution there. But I'm not sure that anybody's going to sit back and do a good, honest review of their campaigns, because the way I see it, the National Party's had an average campaign. I can't think of a single headline thing other than their tax cuts, which has got question marks over. But there's nothing major that we're sitting there. ACT has had probably peaked a little bit early, or a lot early. And the last 3 weeks have been a disaster for them. The Greens, I'm not even sure they've had a campaign, really. They're just sucking up disenchanted Labour voters. Labour's had an appalling campaign. And New Zealand First has had a great campaign, mainly because everyone else has talked about them.
Yes.
So it's Winston Peters' election in terms of a campaign. I mean, he had Kobe, the new dog that he's got, and then he had the video of the horse.
The horse, yeah.
But every time it appears, there's this discussion about Winston Peters on the news, there's the horse video again, So in terms of advertising, that's the biggest bang for the buck, and probably the cheapest ad they've produced ever. That's been spread around hugely. And then you got Shane Jones singing sea shanties. Did you see that one?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
They always have a campaign review a couple of months after the election at Vic Uni. And it'd be very interesting to get the postmortems from all the campaign managers, because sometimes they can be a bit brutally honest.
Yeah, it would be fun to be a fly on the wall in some of the campaign meetings. They sit there and think, well, when did it go wrong? Well, let's look at our poll numbers. Well, it turned here. Well, what did we do around that time? And go back and actually look at it and think, maybe we shouldn't have done that, or we shouldn't have attacked that person. It's always fascinating, that analysis that happens afterwards, and a brave political party does that anyway and is honest about it, even when they win. And I think that's the problem the big parties have had in the past. When they've won, they've sort of shelved the review of the campaign on what they could have done better because, hey, we won and we're in charge.
Yeah.
I think National's more guilty of that than anybody else. Anyway, David, thank you very much for coming on The Crunch and reviewing where we're at with the polls. Just 2 days to go until we get a result, and hopefully we'll have a change of government on Saturday night.
Fingers crossed.
Don't bet against David when it comes to political outcomes. He has far too much information, and his reckons are based on his 30-plus years of polling expertise. We're going to have a new government, but what that new government looks like is up to the voters. Let's see if David's predictions come true on Saturday night. Don't forget to send comments on David's interview to inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
You've heard the words open, fair, both sides of the story. It's easy to say them, but practicing them often seems like a bridge too far. New Zealand, it's time for a reality check. Reality check. RCR, Reality Check Radio. Rational discussion, common sense, and open debate for real. With me, Paul Brennan.
You know, you just can't make this stuff up. You couldn't write the script.
Veteran broadcaster Peter Williams.
Where is the evidence they actually make a difference? It turns out that was a very fair question to ask.
Taking on the mainstream, Chantel Baker.
Mainstream media, as usual, in their little perch.
The man who cares so much and whose background is for real, Rodney Hyde.
The doctors don't believe them. They can't get ACC. They can't work. They're told it's all in their head.
Along with a raft of contributors to inform, entertain, and bring the truth back to New Zealand media. It's time for a reality check, all right. RCR, Reality Check Radio at www.realitycheck.radio. We've arrived.
You're listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
Now it's time for Cam's Buddies. This week, we'll find out what they think of the various campaigns. Who sucked, who won, and who was a bit meh. My producer has them lined up, ready to go. Let's hear what Cam's Buddies have to say about the election campaign. Good afternoon, Paul. Welcome to Cam's Buddies.
Good afternoon, Cam.
So we're at the end of the election campaign. There's just 2 days left before the polls closed at 7 p.m. on Sunday. I'm interested in what your thoughts are about who had the best campaign, who had the worst campaign, and who was just a bit meh.
Campaigns are interesting things to follow. I think the worst campaign, was David Seymour. I think David Seymour had it to lose, and all he could do, he could lose it, but if he did not much, he would have stayed where he was. So I think he kicked an own goal by acting like a petulant child in the minor leaders debate and saying, no, I wouldn't do that, and having all this sort of unusual we're close to election. Everybody can see that if it was National Act and New Zealand First, they could form a strong government with a huge majority.
Yeah.
And then when one of the players is saying, I don't want to play, and then the other guy says, I don't want to play, and then you have National, I thought, have done pretty well in their campaign by just using the John Key tactic of don't do anything stupid. And then they go and do something stupid like saying, Chris Bishop, I think it was, that said, I think we might be concerned that we'd have to have a re-election, and it's not happened since elections began in New Zealand for 1850, and you're looking and thinking, well, what fool would say that? And I heard Winston Peters saying that he thought they misquoted him, and then he looks into it further, and then Christopher Luxon doubles down and says, yeah, and supports him. And then backpedals, and I'm thinking, yeah, well, there you go. A complete politician with huge cabinet experience, done very well. And so I think that was a bit interesting. I think the Maori Party is sort of like a non-event. I've never heard anything about them that's positive or negative. It's just they're not on anyone's radar. And so if they're doing marketing to people that aren't in my demographic, and it could be that it could be all over TikTok or something, and I'm not into TikTok, I wouldn't know. I think New Zealand First, I think, has done the best, because if it was in the old days, it was inches of type in a column would mean whoever got the most of those won. Well, everybody in every party, including Winston Peters, seems to be talking about Winston Peters and New Zealand First. So talking about how New Zealand First, we can't do this and we can't do that, but not about what they're doing. They're talking about New Zealand First. National's talking about New Zealand First. Yes, we'll work with them if we have to. And then, of course, Winston Peters is thinking, well, this is pretty good, getting all this free publicity, and he keeps smiling all the way to the election booth.
And then the Labour Party comes out and puts an image up where it's got Winston Peters looking down on Christopher Luxon sitting in his pocket. And I think a lot of voters have looked at that and said, well, that's about what we want to have, actually.
Yeah, it looks good to me, is what they're thinking. And I think they had a photo there with him looking like he was a cowboy. Everyone, the more you talk about him, the more he likes it. It's like there's no bad publicity for him. He's all doing well.
Yeah.
Like the incumbent government saying stupid things about what's happening in Israel. And like people that you just look and you think, well, have another go at shooting yourself in the foot if you could. And yep, we will. We've just got more to say yet. And then I think, to his credit, old Chippy reined them in a bit. But look and you think, brains were dynamite, these folk wouldn't have enough to blow their nose on the left.
We've seen that a lot in politics. I mean, I can't believe the mistakes that David Seymour has made in this campaign. Just incredible, mistakes that could have been easily avoided. And if he had just hunkered down and not done anything for the last 3 weeks, he probably would have ended up with 12 to 15%. And right now he's probably looking at about 8 or 9.
Well, sure, he's going to do better than he's ever done, so you can't complain about a better than you've ever done. But if you're comparing it to what he could have done, and I know coulda, woulda, shoulda, but I'm looking thinking I thought he was going to get 13 to 15, and then when he's being silly and acting like a child, people think, oh, really? And then by him then coming out and announcing, we have to go with Winston, and it's like I'm eating a dead rat. And then that adds, they should be saying nothing on the subject, and they would have done far, far better.
Oh, absolutely. What about some of these other minor parties like NZ Loyal, Democracy New Zealand, Brian Tamaki's lot? You're a bit connected to politics.
They had an opportunity to do really well. Like they make up people that in the parties missed out make up 8 or 9% of the vote, and with a lot of the jury out at the moment, like lots of people are wanting to move somewhere because the 50% that Labour got, 25% of them are going somewhere, and they're looking for a place to go. So if those parties had joined together in some way, so they said, well, this party's polling at 1, and this party's polling at 1.5, and this party's polling at 2 and 3, if they could have swallowed their egos and got an umbrella party like we've said before, then they could have actually taken way more than the 8% that they have between them. Instead, they're going to get they'll have probably 8 to 10% of wasted votes. So I think whilst it's like the two prisoners, in the end, they both go to jail. And it's like our minor parties. In the end, they don't get elected because they can't agree, because they think that I'm the one that should be at the top, and instead I'm the one that plays left, right, out.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's going to happen. So your pick is Winston's run the best campaign, National's not so bad, ACT have been the author of their own demise, really, and everyone else doesn't matter.
Well, everyone else doesn't matter. I mean, and Labor keeps doing silly things, and but they get the, when they open the books and there's nothing there, and the war chest is empty and more empty than ever, but we're still going to pay for a whole lot more things for you. And then they criticise, Labor's criticising National's financial policy when we're counting the number of the billion trees that they were going to plant. And I mean, I'm sure Labor's very much connected to the army, because there's a lot of gunners. We're going to do the trees, we're going to build the houses, we're going to have everybody out of poverty. We're going to have a house for everybody, and we're going to have Robbie at the back eating the pies. Well, at the end, in my view, the record is very clear. The underachievers in every respect, except they've emptied the coffers.
You've run organisations with large amounts of salespeople. If you look at it on a sales basis, the Labor Party's campaign is like the proverbial guy in your sales team who couldn't take an order from anybody.
Yes. Couldn't sell burgers at McDonald's.
Couldn't sell burgers at McDonald's. Couldn't, well, there's any number of couldn'ts, isn't there? They just couldn't.
Exactly.
And the voting public have had a guts full of them, and that's the end of them. But the trouble with politics is that they can get back up in 3 or 6 years and come back and inflict themselves on us again.
I think the Greens must have done a reasonable policy with the young, because you don't hear them doing or saying much, although I believe they've said a few stupid things about the invasion of Israel. But you don't hear about them much. And for them to be polling in the 13 and 14%, now they dropped a bit just in the last poll I heard, I think they must have done a reasonable campaign, but it's not to me, and I'm not the target market.
Yeah, I think the Greens have benefited considerably from the fact that Labor is so rubbish. And so they've got a few extra percent there that are Labor voters that can't really bring themselves to vote for Labor because they're so rubbish. And at the next election, the Greens are going to drop back a bit to about 10% or under again. But yeah, you and I aren't their target market, so we don't really understand what they are banging on about half the time.
Right, and we don't, like, when it comes up, we sort of scarcely even listen to what they're saying, because it starts off with some woke starting statement that is beyond the pale.
And is then followed usually with taxes against rich people.
Yes, with take and thieve money off people who've worked hard for it, so we can fund something for people that haven't worked at all hard for it. And let everybody's teeth be done, and we'll just do it by taxing the rich. Well, that means the rich are paying for everybody's teeth. Not what they're doing, that's what the rich are doing.
Exactly. All right, thank you, Paul. Thanks for that. And next week we'll talk about the prognosis of the results of the election.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Cam. Bye for now.
Thank you, bye. Hello, Jack. Welcome to Cam's Buddies.
Hey, Cam. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Very good.
So I'm just canvassing the buddies' opinion on who's had a great campaign, who's had an average campaign, and who's had a rubbish campaign, and interested on your thoughts on that.
Okay. Well, the one who sucked is that MP in Parliament who paints his face and wears a hat and who thinks he should have mana or respect but chose none. He wants to take us back to prior to 1840, where life was much better. I suppose there's some good points there. We could save some money and just eat our neighbours, boil them up with a bit of poo-ha. I wonder if he'd put GST on that. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah, that's a bit rough and running some stereotypes there, Jack. But I get your point that he's a bit of a clown, really, and we shouldn't really take him seriously.
Oh, that's why he's the funniest.
Mm.
And there wasn't much humour in the whole campaign anyway, so...
No, there's been a whole lot of negativity, really.
I think Winston ran the best campaign purely because he didn't have to do much. He got all the radios and TV and the opposition parties all doing the work for him.
Yep.
And I think he knows that the average New Zealander kind of favours the underdog. And all they were doing was making him the underdog. So anyway, it got him some votes.
What did you think about that Labor Party ad where they've got Winston with Luxon in his pocket? You know, I saw that ad and I thought, well, that's exactly what I want to happen.
Yes, exactly. I thought that too. We must think alike.
Well, not often. But yeah, I looked at that and I thought, are you desperately stupid to the Labor Party running that ad? That's telling people that Christopher Luxon will be in the pocket of Winston Peters, and a lot of people are looking at that and saying, oh, I think I like that idea.
Me too. Which reminds me, you know, I have a list of people who you never trust.
Mm-hmm.
I won't tell you what they are, but I've just added another one.
Yeah?
You want to hear it?
Of course.
Men who insist on drinking hot chocolate with low-fat milk. Now, would you want one of those in the trench alongside you while going into battle? Which is how I judge all people, but nevertheless.
Yeah.
Which brings me to who...
Not particularly, but yeah, yep. I'm a hot chocolate drinker, but I wouldn't get into any of that low-fat nonsense.
Yeah, well, that's what our next beloved leader drinks. Makes me wonder. I thought the national campaign was the most mediocre because they never said anything that actually rung with me that could actually work.
Well, that's right.
Unfortunately.
They didn't really resonate. And that's probably why they're sitting at mid-30s to high 30s and not cracking that 40% mark. There's no ambition there or no vision that people can get on board with. That's just an it's not the Labor Party. I guess we can vote for them.
I thought that David Seymour worked, of all of them, the hardest by a long way. So much so, I think he's physically exhausted on the point of having a nervous breakdown. And he's forgotten where it really matters. He's forgotten a sense of humour. I presume he has one somewhere. And it's seriously hurting the party. Although Bob Jones said in his report today that it's going to be a landslide and ACT are going to be there really strong. So,
yeah, I'm not sure I agree with Bob Jones on that. I spoke earlier to David Farrer and he's told me that he thinks that ACT's going to land about 8 or 9%. Certainly not the 15% that they were thinking, which is a real shame that David Seymour let his arrogance and hubris get in the way of some good messages.
Well, in my opinion, he should have put Brooke Van Velden up front towards the end there. She's really good, that girl. I
agree with you. He looks like he's run out of puff. You know, he looked very flat in that leaders debate last week. And, I'm not sure he's recovered. And I know someone who had dinner with him on Friday night and said he was quite despondent in his demeanour. So, that's probably showing him this week. Mm. Yeah, I think that Taxpayers Union poll really popped his balloon.
Yes. What rating did he get up to? What was his high point? What percentage was that? Do you recall?
I think about 15% is the high point.
I know. And he lost it all.
Yeah, he peaked too early and didn't have any wherewithal to, but he was advised multiple times not to attack Winston Peters. Don't go and attack New Zealand first. But he just doubled down on it and just carried on, and that has hurt him in this election big time. I agree.
Yep.
All right, Jack. Thank you for your opinion on that, and we'll see next week what the lay of the land looks like and what we can hope for.
Okay. See you later.
All right, mate. Thank you. Welcome to Cam's Buddies. Jimmy, how are you?
G'day, Cameron. I'm very well, thanks. I'm excited for the election. How about you, mate?
Yeah, I'm excited too. It's been a really strange election. You know, I was discussing earlier with David Farrer about that and, got his predictions on where things are landing. We had a bit of agreement on how the campaigns went, and I thought it would be a good idea to ask the buddies what they thought about the various parties' campaigns, who was good, who was bad, who was average, and get your thoughts. So fire away.
Well, my thoughts are ACT started well, but it's deteriorated in the last 2 weeks. Winston started just normally, and then he shone in the last 2 weeks. So, and that's reflected in the polls quite obviously. Nationals probably had a pretty mediocre white bread plan. Labor's has sucked. Everything this Labor government has done has sucked, including their election campaign, because they had nothing to campaign on positive. So they had to go negative.
What did you think about the Labor Party's ad where they had Winston Peters with Christopher Luxon in his pocket?
Well, it's a disgrace. Same as that TVNZ thing on the weather, where they had the subliminal message of Winston national win, New Zealand lose. I mean,
just ridiculous. Right? But I think, though, that that ad is, people have looked at that and thought, gee, that's exactly what I want. I want to see Christopher Luxon under control, and I want Winston Peters to be the person controlling it.
Well, he's got a lot of experience, but he's also got a history of, well, I don't know. It's hard to tell with politics what's the truth, eh?
Exactly. You're an ACT supporter.
Yes.
What do you think about what's happened with the ACT Party, where they were sitting on 15 to 18% just 3 or 4 months ago?
I don't know. Winston's stolen a lot of their support, I'm guessing. I think that maybe David Seymour came across a little bit arrogant for a while and entitled to that vote. But I think Winston's just dug away at that really anti-government vote. And that was with ACT, and now Winston's taken it off him.
Who do you reckon has had the worst campaign?
I don't really know, actually. Who do you think? I don't know.
Yeah, it's not what I think.
In the last 2 weeks,
people want to know what you think.
Well, that's true. I think in the last 2 weeks, ACT has really not gone well, unfortunately. They've had a real lot of negative media and negative publicity and, comments that are unnecessary. But overall, total worst. I mean, ACT did start very well. The last month or two, a lot of good stuff happened with ACT. It's only lasted a few weeks. Probably Labor, just because they just had no success to stand in front of for the election campaign. They couldn't stand up and show 100,000 houses or a well-functioning health system or, just nothing. The Greens campaign, I don't really particularly watch the Green campaign, but it seemed pretty sort of smooth. It doesn't seem too.
I don't think we're their target market, to be fair, and I think their target market is disaffected Labor voters this election.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And so the Greens will do probably quite well in this election, and Labor probably won't do very well. And that's just typical always with if Labor somehow get a good leader in the future, then the Green vote will shrink again. It's just how it always seems to be.
Just how it works, yeah.
It's a funny old election campaign, eh?
Well, it's really hard.
I can't wait for it to go.
It's been really hard. Like up until about 3 or 4 months ago, it was harder to pick than a broken nose, and then all of a sudden it just broke, and Labor's support just plummeted. I see that Jacinda Ardern has said that she wants to help out the Labor Party in the last couple of days. Yeah, I'm just wondering, is she just going to stay silent? Because that's about the only thing that'll help the Labor Party. If she opens her gob, that's just going to turn a whole lot more people off Labor.
You would think so, that she was that deeply unpopular at the end that would probably happen. And who over at Harvard, in these snooty parties, rubbing her face in it while people are suffering, it just seems so, it flies in your face so badly, eh?
Totally.
Yeah, I hope she comes out and endorses Labor big time and buries Hipkins, beats Bill English's record, Cam.
No, I think Bill English should have to carry that for a fair few more years yet. But that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, but yeah, I just honestly I can't wait. I'm sick of listening to it.
I'm honestly over politics.
It's been a horrible campaign, hasn't it? I mean, I don't even want to watch the last debate later tonight. I just don't want to watch it. It's going to be awful, and it's not going to change too much of the vote.
No, well, heaps of people have voted already, right? So,
yeah, exactly.
Well, I guess they're saying that 10 to 12% still swing voters could change the election, but
yeah, I'm not sure on that. I think the gap is just too big.
You think Winston's going to do well in the end? Hoover up?
Yeah,
8% maybe?
David Farrar reckons he could be around 8%. He said there's a chance, a small chance, but a chance nonetheless, and one that could come true, where New Zealand First outpolls the ACT Party. So things could get very interesting. I've certainly got a few bets on that could pay off handsomely if that happens.
Yeah, well, last poll, ACT were on 9, and Winston, so they could drop one more and Winston goes up a bit more than we think. It could probably potentially happen. But, yeah, it's hard to pick, eh?
Yeah, very hard. And you're thinking, this is my job. I have to sit there and give people's opinions on where I think things are going, and I like to be right. So it's very, very difficult. Anyway, that's it for this week. And next week we can have a post-mortem and work out what happened.
Oh, we can too.
We can actually go to town next week and, just hammer the people that failed completely and question those who have won, whether they're doing the right thing, and we'll have an indication about whether there's a deal in the offering or not. But it's going to be interesting.
Does Hipkins step down on election night if he loses, Cameron?
Well, no, he'll probably hang around for a little bit longer until he realises that this is going to be a bit too hard. There's just too much happening on the other side that, to outvote them. There's not a lot of wins being the leader of the opposition when you've been the Prime Minister. So, I think he'll probably quit after about 6 months or so, and there'll be a by-election in his electorate.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay, well, thank you today.
Thank you. Welcome to Cam's Buddies, Miles.
Good afternoon, Cam. How are you?
Fantastic, as usual. Now, I thought I'd finish up the election coverage on the Crunch with a buddy's assessment of which parties they think had a good campaign, an average campaign, or a rubbish campaign. So I'm interested in your thoughts.
Okay. Well, I've been following the major parties and some of the smaller parties. I have to take my hat off to Brian Tamaki, the Freedom People. I think they've had a very good campaign. Despite the media blackout, I think that they have stood tall and been visible. If I had to say who had the worst campaign, I would have to pick David Seymour. I don't know what's happened to him in the last few weeks, but he seems to have a serious case of foot in the mouth disease. I'm not sure what's happened to Luxon. He seems to be Luxon. One moment he is the business manager. Next moment he says, we're going to have to go for a new election because I can't do a deal with the minor parties. So here's my assessment. If I start with Chris Hipkins, it's a genuine shame that he had COVID, and I mean that sincerely. I would have liked to have seen him out on the election hustings to get the pasting he so richly deserves. I don't think it's quite the same when you're hiding away in your basement with or without COVID, but it's a real shame that he had it.
He probably kept Labor's vote up by being in, isolation.
I think that's true.
If he'd carried on the hustings and coming out with all his negative talk and everything, I think they would have driven the Labor vote further south. I mean, Sunday night they released their little ad with Winston with Luxon in his pocket, and I'm not sure it had the result that they were hoping for with that ad.
I think it had quite the opposite effect. I think it has been Winston's campaign, and I'm not sure what Winston has done, but I can tell you a hell of a lot was done by the other parties. ACT, National and Labor have all made the last few weeks Winston's campaign.
Yeah, I mean,
so in horse racing terms, he's the winner.
Yeah, I imagine he's going to have the biggest grin on Saturday night. So I'm looking forward to being there to see that. It's going to be an interesting night, that's for sure, as we watch the results roll in.
Yep, he'll sure be eating a chicken dinner. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. That's for sure.
Exactly.
I can't believe that the other parties were talking so much about someone else. In my view, an election campaign is about selling your strengths. Now, for better or for worse, National has a lot of strengths, and they should have used the opportunity to highlight those in a much greater degree rather than going after another party. David Seymour and ACT, goodness me, there's some real advantages having ACT in the mix, make no mistake about that. But what on earth was David Seymour thinking? He is the face of ACT. People make their judgment whether to vote for ACT based on what David Seymour says and does, in a much similar way as Hipkins. Hipkins, I think, as you rightly say, improved Labor's vote by saying nothing. But whenever he came out with something negative, I'm almost 100% certain that backfired big time on him.
Yeah, I think the attacks on New Zealand First and then his performance in the minor leaders debate have really cost him big time. Yeah,
I am not sure about the other minor parties, but as I said, hats off to the Freedom Party with Brian Tamaki. I think they've done a lot to promote the cause. I think that there's a lot of people who are very proud that they have stood for freedom, and a lot of people who have made great sacrifices because they believe in freedom. And I think that, as I have said before, I think that's the elephant in the room, and I think that those people who I loosely call the freedom vote, they are going to make a big difference this election. And I'm not sure that the negativity of Labor, the wishy-washiness of National, or the foot and mouth disease of ACT is going to attract the freedom vote.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. And, I was talking earlier on the show to a Vision New Zealand candidate who's also the head of the Man Up program. And, it's a crying shame that the politicians and the bureaucrats just won't look at it because it involves Brian Tamaki somewhere in the mix. The successes that those guys are having it in getting people out of a life of crime is incredible, and I think it's something that should be endorsed. And a good political party would look at some of the policies of the other parties, pick the eyes out of them for what works and what's good, and start on developing that.
Well, can I say, I know we're supposed to be saying who's had a good and bad campaign. Can I say that the biggest losers in this campaign are the media? The mainstream media have shown themselves for what they are, a truly biased organisation, and I think the mainstream media need to hang their heads in shame. And if I was the minister in charge in the next government, I would make sure that TVNZ, Radio New Zealand get sold. I think they've lived past their use-by date. I think what they've done in this campaign has been nothing short of scandalous, and we are right now experiencing our own Hunter Biden laptop scare with this revelation that there were exemptions granted for vaccination, and I haven't seen that in the mainstream media. I mean, I think the mainstream media needs to be pilloried for their role in the election campaign.
Well, let's hope that Winston has his media Utu policy ready to go after the election.
Well, I don't wish ill of anybody, but I think that we shouldn't be funding TVNZ and we shouldn't be funding Radio New Zealand. And I think that, the big boys of media need to understand that the average man in the street is totally switched off by their bias and one-eyed reporting.
Well, there certainly needs to be a shake-up, but I guess that's why Reality Check Radio exists as a counterfoil against the bias of the mainstream media and why we're growing, hugely as a result.
And all power to you, because here I find that I can get a viewpoint that is basically hidden by the mainstream media, and I don't know why they are such strong cheerleaders. Yes, I do. I mean, I really do. They are paid, and I think it's just a crying shame that we've got to this in this country. I would like to see the mainstream media report fairly, but I guess that's a pipe dream. So if you wanted my biggest loser, I think that has to be the mainstream media. I think that the biggest winner of this campaign has to be New Zealand First, and I think that's simply because everyone else is dumping on Winston Peters. It's almost as if New Zealand First and Winston Peters have their own derangement syndrome. If you mention Winston Peters, people go off like a firecracker. Yeah. I think the biggest disappointment of this campaign for me personally has been David Seymour. He has so much potential. The ACT policies are sensible and sound, and I think that David Seymour has done a lot of damage to ACT. I'm not sure that Nationals campaign manager Chris Booster Bishop has been the right choice. I would have gone with Eid any day of the week. Chris Booster Bishop seems to have shot first without even engaging the brain. So I'm concerned that Nationals campaign has been let down by poor campaign management.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. I mean, pretty much all the other buddies have said the same thing, that Nationals campaign was a bit average, with mixed in with a bit of stupidity and coming out with some of the statements, particularly the ones about starting to talk about having to have a re-election process if they can't
Good Lord,
negotiate.
Where did that come from? I mean, it's crazy.
Totally crazy. I mean, they've been telling
Crazy
us
talk.
that their leader, Christopher Luxon's the greatest businessman to ever grace the earth after John Key. And, in my experience, businessmen who have run large corporations are pretty good at negotiating things. And here they were saying that, well, we're not sure we'd be able to cut a deal. Well, if you can't cut a deal with Winston Peters, who's very amenable to cutting deals, then it says more about you than it does about Winston Peters.
Yeah, and finally, I'd like to reserve a word for Christopher Hipkins. As I said, it's a shame that he was hobbled by COVID.
But hang on, wasn't he vaccinated?
I think, yeah, vaccinated. But seriously, he should have been out there on the hustings. I think that he would have run a much better campaign, and the negative campaign that came out of Labor was no credit to them at all. I'm sure they did something in their terms. I'm not sure what, but I'm sure that they could have found some positive things that they had done to stay away from houses, roads, health, water, and about 1,000 other things. But there must be something positive there. And look, let's be fair. The campaign was turned around, I think, in the last 2 weeks with the negativity and the dumping on various parties and candidates. And I think if you're in a battle to win hearts and minds, you sell yourself. You say, this is what makes us good. We think that we deserve your support because this is how we're going to make your life better. And I didn't hear that coming through as loud and clear as I hoped I would.
Well, I think you've made yourself totally clear to the listeners here on The Crunch, and I look forward to talking to you next week when we can have a post-mortem and dissect and carve up what the results of the election campaign have been. And I look forward to celebrating that on Saturday night.
And if I can have a last word, I know I don't need to say this to the listeners. Please get out and vote and make your vote count. I know the freedom vote's out there. If you guys are listening, I take my hat off to you. I know what you've been through. For heaven's sake, think carefully and make your vote count.
Yeah, exactly. And I concur with that 100%. You have to vote. Otherwise, you don't really have a right to criticise. But make your vote count. Don't waste your vote. Choose wisely, and if that's with your conscience, so be it. But think about what's best for the country as a whole.
I agree, and I think that we're going to have an exciting election night.
I think we are. All right, thank you, Miles, and I'll give you a call next week.
Thank you, Cam.
My buddies are awesome. They never let me down. Tell us who you think is the best of Cam's buddies and why that is by emailing inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
The greatest threat to our democracy and our country is the belief that someone else will save it. RCR is on a mission to revive honest media, and now you too can help make that happen. Introducing the Foundation Members Club, the easiest way to support RCR and be rewarded for doing so. Receive exclusive benefits only for members, including your very own backstage pass to join the hosts for interactive behind-the-scenes discussions. And also our all-new daily curated news summary, RCR Bites, delivered to your email inbox every morning, keeping you on the pulse of the news that matters in just a few minutes per day. To find out more, visit realitycheck.radio/members and see how you too can join the mission that's making a difference.
Our text machine is now live. Send us your thoughts by texting your message to 2057. That's 2057. So get in touch with us now.
Well, it's time for the most popular part of the show, the feedback from the mailbag. Here's some general feedback. We've got an anonymous email. I'd love to know why Cam thinks Matt King doesn't have a chance at the Northland seat. I would have thought, having had it before and being a farmer, he might have a strong chance. I was going to vote DNZ, but now I'm realistic in that New Zealand First is the only hope for us, and I think Winston needs a chance to redeem and stir the pot. Winston for Prime Minister. However, I'd still love Matt to win Northland, as I think he would be good to complement National too. I'm actually scared about National as much as I am of Labour and the Greens. Well, Anonymous, I think that Matt King isn't going to win Northland seat because there's been 4 polls in that electorate and he's done no better than 4th in each one of those polls. And I deal with reality. And sadly, Matt King is not going to make it. We've got another anonymous comment saying, what do you think of Luxon's announcement today about a New Zealand space program? Well, I don't think very much of it at all, Anonymous. I think that he's being a space cadet. And we've got, 2 companies that are working in the space, and they're private companies, and they don't need the government's involvement in it, and the government shouldn't be involved in this at all. It's a ridiculous waste of money, and it's a stupid idea. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Kushla says, hi, Cam, really enjoy your shows on RCR, in particular those relating to political discussions in the lead up to the New Zealand general elections and the potential coalition partners' options for the formation of 2023 post-election government. This comes from left field, but is there a chance of a national-led Labour coalition? Current polls show the numbers are there. What could or would preclude this from occurring? Well, I've always said there's never been a grand coalition in New Zealand because that's what it would be called. There is a possibility. I mean, everyone can see that Christopher Luxon would be extremely comfortable in the Labour Party. But the only thing that would stop that from occurring is a revolt amongst National's supporters and his own caucus. But never say never. It is politics after all. Anonymous says, I just received my voting pack. Interesting that Marama Davidson has been very quiet with James Shaw fronting the election debates, yet she is number one on the list. Well, everyone knows that Marama Davidson is just straight out crazy. James Shaw is the acceptable face of the Green Party, and that's why he's fronting everything. All right, we have a very long email here from Mark. Mark says, what I've learned over the last 3 years, my dogs have become my moral and spiritual compass. George Orwell's 1984 and Animal Farm have both become non-fictional. And I'm grateful we've lost long-term acquaintances and friends based on differing vaccine and mandate choices, but quickly gathered a new tribe of like-minded folk that have deep concerns and solutions for the betterment of society and democracy. I have learnt that the experimental and EUA COVID-19 vaccine mantra of safe and effective, produced by the most criminally prosecuted company in the world and mandated by vaccine-exempt politicians, proves that mass hypnosis does work on people who are stupid. But I've also learnt not to force people on what or how they think, but to make the unconscious conscious by simply asking questions like, follow the money. I was once an anti-vaxxer who quickly turned into anti-farmer, who eventually became anti-globalist. And I learnt during the climate change fast that CO2, a non-toxic gas, makes up just 0.04% of the atmosphere, and 3% of that 0.04% is man-made. So CO2 is up there with oxygen in importance. In fact, life wouldn't exist without it. Furthermore, billions, close to now trillions of dollars, have been spent on net zero initiatives that have been diverted away from real pollution issues like plastics, sewage, toxic pesticides and herbicides, etc., resulting in economic carnage where we are taxing workers and business billions of dollars to fund a problem that doesn't exist. I soon became aware that mainstream media, together with social media giants, globalists, governments, and related agencies, UN, WHO, and WEF, combined to form the world's largest fascist cabal. Paradox of the century, single source of truth, and censorship are required for democracy and freedom of speech to prosper. In summary, I was once a pacifist. I am now indebted to an independent podcasts and social media outlets like Reality Check Radio, Dark Horse, Rogan, etc., who have fed my intellect and awareness. However, I look to my grandchildren who feed my soul. I am now belligerent. I will, to my last remaining breath, defend their futures for freedom and bodily autonomy based on a non-divisive society. Restore the immediate family and the village tribe as the best inner circle to raise and assist a child's development, not Agenda 2030, bureaucrats, technocrats, and or politicians who with certainty are not acting in civilization's best interests. Now to my interview with Maurice Williamson. Maurice Williamson, what an inspired choice. I love his enthusiasm and inspired insight. Thank you, Cam, from Anonymous. Jackie says, hi, Cam. I always enjoy your show. The interview with Maurice Williamson was a good listen. Thanks heaps. Anon says, totally agree with Maurice Williamson. Thumbs up. Another anonymous commenter says, thank you for your last interview. Comforting to hear truth, not watching any more debates and getting wound up at the bias and shouting in indignation at the TV. A wise person said to me, who do the media hate the most? Because that is who we should vote for. Why? Because the media hate the truth, and I noticed they are particularly disrespectful of Winston Peters. Some Facebook feedback. Excellent interview. Maurice talks a lot of sense. And Nick says, listening now, I agree that MSM polls are rigged. Winston Peters interview, we have Diana who says, I just listened to Cam's interview with Winston Peters on The Crunch. Absolutely fabulous. I'm loving all the political panels and discussions on The Crunch and Paul's morning breakfast show. Go RCR. Loving your work. Another anonymous comment says, hi, Cam, appreciated your interview with Winston. Got to have respect for a man who's been in the game so long, has shown he's open to changing his mind as new evidence comes to the front, and the caliber of people he has in his party are fantastic. Go New Zealand first. Bobby says, Cam, further to your interview with Winston, an amazing interview between two people who understand the art of great communication. And Marie says, what a great interview with Winston. Enjoy RCR. You're all pretty amazing. Tracy says, Cam, I'm not so happy with Winston's attitude to the firearms register. Ask him next time about a sporting exemption to own AR-15 sporting rifles. Yeah, I'm with you, Tracy. I'm not happy about Winston's attitude on the firearms register, but I'm not a single issue voter. So I'm, looking at other policies as well. Anonymous says, ask Winston if he still believes the unvaxxed were holding the country to ransom, like he's so famously quoted as saying. Well, yes, I did ask him in my first interview, and he's apologized for those tweets. And he's also retracted his belief. But at the moment, there's a few interested parties that want nothing more than to tear New Zealand First down, and so they're spreading that as far and wide as they can. Anonymous says, great interview with Winston Peters gives one hope for the future. And James says, great show today. Winston is so right. Mainstream media are bolstering left-wing perspectives. Great interview with Winston. First time I'm not backing National. I don't want more Labour policy dressed as a mid-conservative free enterprise administration. After over 53 years as a voter, I see Winston this time as an essential component in keeping big government, Luxon/Seymour, One World Schwab supporters both honest. I want our Western democracy to survive this Labour and legacy media drive for a communist you'll own nothing and you'll be happy Uncle Klaus regime. Anonymous says, I'm voting Winnie, but why did he remove not working with Labour? Well, he didn't remove it. That was some misinformation that was spread firstly by Sean Plunkett and then by some various other parties. The information is still on the website. It's still there, and you can find it easily by just Googling it. I really do hope if Winston gets in, he stays humble, that he sticks to his policies, change well if needed, keeps his eyes and ears on the hearts of Kiwis, and says sorry if he makes a mistake. Well, we can wish that for all politicians. From Facebook, Tracy says, such a brilliant interview. Whether you're a Winston fan or not, on the political fence in the freedom community, or just want to know Winston better, don't miss this one. And we've got a few comments about Cam's buddies. Anonymous says, people need to know there are ways of removing the spike protein. Dr. Peter McCullough and flccc.net has many protocols to help. A lot of my friends and family have died or become sick pretty soon after the jab. Many still sick. Whoa, Cam and mates, there appeared to be no ceiling to COVID propaganda expenditure, so why should there be a limit to the amount of compensation for the vaccine engine? Cam, I'm a Sparky. I can name 14 people in my sphere who have had a vaccine injury from stroke, heart attack, myocarditis, pericarditis, death, etc., etc. Main diagnosis, dehydrated. Mike says, hey, Cam, your mate Jack must have been living with his head in the sand for the last 3 years. He needs to listen to Guy Hatchett, Ivor Cummins, Michael Yeadon, Peter McCullough, and all the other world authorities on the subject and see what his opinion is then. Cheers, Mike. Cam's molecular biologist, correct. Why is MedSafe not stopping the vaccine? Have they been bought off by Big Pharma? They must be held accountable. Cam's buddies, the discussion regarding excess deaths. If we have an increase of 17%, a quick survey of the funeral homes might clarify the subject. They would notice a 17% increase in business. And finally, hello, Cam. I met a chap in Ellerslie on Sunday who had the shakes. This came upon him within 4 hours of his second vaccine. He was a fellow chair user. I was coerced into 2 vaccines, so I was able to be at my dying wife's side at the hospice. The vaccine injured claims should be funded by Pfizer and Co. That's it from the mailbag this week. Thank you for all your contributions. Appreciated as usual.
You're listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
Right, that's it for The Crunch this week. The election campaign is done, and next week we'll conduct a post-mortem into the results. Who won, who lost, and what does it all mean going forwards? For now, if you haven't voted, then please get out there and vote. You can hardly complain if you don't. The shape of our next government is in your hands. And I get the feeling that people are angry, and that anger is going to show in the vote. So watch carefully when the Electoral Commission drops the advanced voting numbers shortly after 7 p.m. on Saturday. There are some key battles to look at on the night. Northland, Tamaki, the two Hamiltons, and New Plymouth will all give us insights into which way things are heading. It will be a landslide for the opposition, but probably not for the National Party. They're going to need pals, and so it's up to us to vote to give them pals who think like us, not like them. And just remember that every party currently in Parliament, including National and ACT, refused to listen when citizens tipped up at Parliament wanting to be heard. It's time to make them listen to us. And that's why we here at Reality Check Radio give you all sides of any story or issue. And it's a job we all love doing. If you're using the RCR app, and you really should be, go to the replays and select Election 23 to get all of RCR's election coverage. And there is a lot of it. RCR has conducted over 200 interviews relating to local, national, and international politics, including over 150 interviews concerning our general election. In keeping with our philosophy, we've provided information and insights to you, our audience, so that you may weigh your options and make your own educated voting decisions this October. As a result, our hosts have interviewed leaders and representatives from a wide range of political parties, both major and minor. It's been a real pleasure having you all back this week. I'm loving all your feedback and really enjoying talking to so many people, sharing their thoughts on politics, life, and everything in between. The campaign is over, but politics is like rust. It never sleeps. So here at The Crunch, we'll continue holding politicians' feet to the fire. And a big shout out to all of you, and thank you for listening and having your faith in me as we continue to explore this beautiful game of politics. Don't forget, email suggestions to inbox@realitycheck.radio for people for me to interview. And let's continue to make this show the best political show in New Zealand. Stay tuned for a breakfast show repeat coming up next with features including Money Talks with my buddy Farzan Irani and Perigo's Perspective with the one and only Lindsay Perigo. Looking forward to having you join me again next Thursday at 4 p.m. for The Crunch with Cam Slater.
You've been listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater. Remember, you can check out the replays for today's show on our website at www.realitycheck.radio/replays. Tune in every Thursday at 4 p.m. for more with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.